We're talking with Adam Gorightly and Greg Bishop about their book, A is for Adamski. There's some names in here that you might recall, but you may not have thought of them as contactees, one of them being Charles Hickson. You might recall a couple of months ago we had Calvin Parker on the program, and he told us the story of their abduction experience, one of the most famous abduction cases in the world. But what I didn't know until I read this book is that his partner in that event, Charles Hickson, who was out with him fishing on the night of the events that were described by Calvin, had ongoing contacts and very disturbing experiences. We'll hear that story and also the story of Omnek Onek, who says she was born on Venus when we come back. Adam or Greg, I'm not sure which of you would like to take this one, but the story about Calvin Parker surprised me. Which of you wrote that chapter?
Hickson.
Charles Hickson.
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 Yeah, I wrote that one. I suggested that to Adam, actually.
So go ahead and dive into that. I did not know these other details. We all know, of course, we've heard about Parker and Hickson and their abduction experience, but did not realize that Hickson had ongoing encounters.
Yeah, that actually surprised me, too. I found that out by reading the book he wrote with, I think, a man named Menendez called UFO Contact at Pascagoula. I think it was written probably in the early 80s or maybe late 80s. Anyway, what Hickson described was, everything they went through, obviously, with the original abduction in October 11th, 1973. But what happened after that, after they, stopped their jobs and all that, their lives went into turmoil from talking about this. So early the next year, in 1974, Hickson said he was out hunting. He was squirrel hunting out in the woods in Mississippi. He said, or Louisiana. He said that he was sitting against a tree, like having lunch or something, and he said suddenly the whole place got quiet. Like people say that happens, that Oz effect during a UFO encounter. And he said he saw some sort of ship resting a few hundred feet away from him, and a voice in his head said something like, we mean you no harm. We have a message that you have to deliver, and you have been chosen to give this message out. Now, to me, that is a 100%, a very contactee type of experience. He had another one later, but he didn't see anything. I think his dog was barking at something outside, behind his apartment at the time. He went outside and he got another kind of a space brothery message. And then finally, I believe the year after that, him and his family, about 5 people from his family, were coming back from a Mother's Day gathering, and it was about twilight in the woods in northern Louisiana. They were coming back, I think, from a gathering in Texas or something like that. They were coming back through northern Louisiana, and they encountered a UFO sitting in the road. His whole family was there. They were all terrified. So there was a multiple witness event. But yeah, so there's a lot more to Charles Hickson's story than most people know, and he stuck to this story for the rest of his life. He no more contacts, I don't think, but he said that he felt like there had been some sort of communication, and that he was chosen to give a message of peace and harmony to the Earth, just like most other contactees.
Adam, there's a name in here that I did not know. I know the other names associated with it, that being rocket scientist Jack Parsons and Scientology founder L. Ron Hubbard. Their involvement with a lady named Marjorie Cameron. What's her story?
Oh, boy, that's a fascinating one. And you stated that you were surprised at some of the people included in the book, and maybe she would be one of those surprises like Charles Hickson, because they're not your typical UFO contactee, when you think of UFO contactees. But she was married to Jack Parsons, and we've become familiar with the story of Jack Parsons. I guess there's been a television series recently. He was a rocket scientist and ritual magician, connected with L. Ron Hubbard and Scientology, and they conducted a series of rituals called the Babylon Working that are kind of legendary in magic lore. And at one point, according to the legends, and a lot of these things are legends, it's hard to pin down a lot of stuff, but when they're out in the Mojave Desert, they conjured or had an encounter with some sources say a Venusian or another worldly entity. And around the time this was happening, Marjorie Cameron showed up, and her and Jack Parsons engaged in a long-standing affair and eventually marriage. And the first night she showed up at Jack Parsons' house, she claimed she saw a cigar-shaped UFO, and when Parsons heard that, he decided, well, this is the person that needs to be involved in the Babylon working, these rituals, because the whole design of the Babylon working was to call down a magical child into the womb of the participant, the female in the operation. That was going to be Marjorie Cameron. And so all of this was going on, and in 1952, that pivotal year with contactees is when Jack Parsons died. And apparently his death happened the same time there was a sighting of over the Pentagon of all these UFOs. And
July 1952, 2 weeks in a row, 2 weekends in a row, pretty dramatic.
Yeah, and Marjorie Cameron took that as her own sign that there was great significance in all of this, and they tapped into something otherworldly. After Jack Parsons died, she, for several years, went to Mexico and lived in an artist colony. But then later in the mid-50s, she ends up at the area of Giant Rock. She was living in Pioneer Town, which is like a stone's throw from Giant Rock, and she befriended George Van Tassel, of all people. There's all these interweaving connections. And she was a very talented artist, and she painted quite a few portraits of interdimensional beings, and so all of this resonated throughout her whole life. Her interactions with Jack Parsons and the Babylon working, and afterwards contact with, perhaps these were interdimensional beings, but she had that connection throughout her whole life. And in the book, there's a photo I happened upon and published in the book of Marjorie standing in front of Giant Rock.
Yeah, all roads lead to Giant Rock. Omnek Onek, Greg. This is the one person you've got in the book that I interviewed. I interviewed her.
Really?
Yeah, it was an International UFO Congress. In the book, you talk about her speaking at one in Laughlin in 1991. She was at one here in Las Vegas. It's either 92 or 93. They held that same event here instead of in Laughlin, and I interviewed her. And she was wearing the silver suit. And so this lady's story is she's from Venus?
Yeah, she said that she was what's called, I guess, a walk-in, that there was a 7-year-old girl who died in a bus accident in Chattanooga, Tennessee in 1955, and she said that Omnek Onek entered her body and was raised as that child until she reached adulthood, and then started to realize that she really was from Venus, and that she had to tell people about this and make people aware of the Galactic Brotherhood. Wendell Stevens published her first book. It's the only book I've ever seen. And like a lot of UFO contactee books, it's quite rare and expensive right now. It was called From Venus I Came. There's a picture of her on the front cover, and it's a good picture too. She looked. It would sell a lot of books. Her face. She was an attractive woman. I never met her. I never talked to her, but I did see her at Laughlin and saw her wandering around. She's quite striking. She's still alive, as far as I know. I think she's had a stroke. She has, I think, 4 Earth children, and I found a reference to her from a former husband who I guess, gets along with her. He wrote a post on the internet called "My Ex-Wife Was Born on Venus," and talked about his life with her, how he came to believe her story, even though they weren't together anymore, and really couldn't find any holes in her story. Although I guess there's no way of proving it. So I guess
I remember that she was very straightforward about the whole thing. It seemed ridiculous on its face, but there was no guile involved. You make a point in the chapter of the book that she went on Jerry Springer, and I would assume that was to make fun of her, but that she kind of impressed everyone because of her seriousness and credibility, you said. Yeah. I mean, it's a lot of these people get on these shows, and it depends how they take it, and she handled herself very well. She didn't really care whether people believed her or not, which I think is probably the best attitude to take when you have a story like this. There was one of the accounts, I can't remember who it's about, in the book, about a contactee who went onto a show with Jackie Gleason. And we know the stories about Jackie Gleason and his interest in UFOs, but it sounds like Jackie Gleason was out to gut this guy it was either television or radio. Do you remember which chapter that is?
I think it was Van Tassel, right, Adam?
George King.
Oh, King, that's right. And you did the chapter on King, but I remember excerpting that from the Long John Nebel book. He actually transcribed some of that conversation with Gleason live on the air. He also Gleason was also a fan of Gray Barker, and he didn't take Gray Barker 100% seriously either, but he did tussle with him on the air as well. Maybe Adam can talk a little bit about that.
Well, I think you can find the actual interview on YouTube. I wouldn't be surprised if some of the Long John Nebel shows, and Jackie Gleason would often call into Long John Nebel, and of course your listeners are probably aware of Jackie Gleason had a really avid interest in ufology, had a huge library, had a home he built that was a flying saucer.
Yeah, we know the story about the story told by his widow about Gleason going with Nixon to an air base to see bodies?
Yeah. So there's in Florida, so there's these legends about Jackie Gleason, and he was a fan of Long John Nebel, but he wasn't bashful of calling out those who he thought were full of it. And one of those was George King, who started the basically saucer religion of Aetherius, which is still active in Los Angeles. In fact, Greg and I visited the Aetherius, what would you call it? The
Aetherius Society World Headquarters in Hollywood.
Yes, and so basically Gleason ran George King through the ringer and called him on the carpet for...
Another name I thought I was surprised is Ray Stanford, and I've communicated with him many times over the years, and always thought of him as a pretty nuts and bolts guy who had done great work trying to investigate the Socorro, New Mexico incident, sighting, famous UFO case. But you have him listed in this book as a contactee, and I guess he must have started pretty early. Greg, is that one yours?
Yes, it is. He started pretty early. He was in his teens. Him and his twin brother Rex were both interested in the UFO subject and got involved with the contactees early on. They used to visit with Adamski and Williamson and people like that. There's kind of a saucy story about him and Williamson in the book, which I won't get into right now, which was told to me by actually third hand by Jim Mosley at one point, but then Stanford told the actual story on my podcast at one point on Radio Mysterioso. But yeah, early on they were doing channelings. They were doing exactly what all the other contactees did, both him and his brother. Rex went off to be a pretty well-respected parapsychologist. Ray, I think the Socorro investigation probably turned him away from so much of the channeling and the Space Brothers stuff and more towards maybe what you would call a nuts and bolts view of what was going on. And this led him to capture a bunch of film and recordings of what he says are anomalous objects in the sky. And apparently they're pretty good, but he won't show them to anybody because he thinks people are going to misinterpret them or take him the wrong way or take them away from him or something like that. But he's got 2 or 3 early books that could be considered right down the middle of a contactee book. One of them was called Look Up. I think him and his brother wrote that.
Adam, what can we learn from the contactees that's useful as we sort of filter claims that are made now?
I'm not sure, but in your intro to the show, you were talking about being happy and enjoying what's going on in the world, and I always get that vibe from the contactees. Once again, it was a more innocent time, basically that.
Same question, Greg.
What about the
is there anything we can learn from these cases that's useful for us as we interpret and absorb UFO claims today?
I think the usefulness of it is there has been a turn recently towards listening more to the person that has the experience rather than sticking them in a category or just gathering data or whatever. And this has to do with an individual experience. You can't get more individual experience than the contactees. And so I think that some of the spiritual truths, some of the connections they made for themselves, some of the ways that they move towards their own happiness are very relevant to us right now. You don't have to believe what they said and literally to take them seriously in a spiritual way. As a friend of mine said that studying paranormal stuff, she said, Shannon Taggart, she said, people don't understand that I take this seriously but not literally. And I think that's a really good attitude to have.
There's several of the examples that you use. They become religions. They become, in essence, prophets of their own religion, or sort of the
ego
priests.
gets involved.
Yeah,
and when the ego gets involved, it's kind of the thing where you have a spiritual awakening, and you think you found the answer, so you must think you're the person with the answer. And you get a few people around you who think you do have the answer. It's really good to get. It's really easy to get into kind of a guru feedback loop, and I think that happened quite a bit with a lot of these contactees. But I don't think, with the exception of people like maybe Marshall Applewhite and possibly Claude Vorilhon or Rael, I don't think that these contactees and the leaders of these movements really abuse these people's trust.
You get a sense, Adam, of any of these, and it's hard to, from the prism of 2018, to look back and say, this gal had a legit experience, and then they built on it. They got a thrill out of the attention they got, so they started making stuff up after what appeared to have been an actual encounter.
Well, that seems to be the cases with, the case with a lot of the contactees. I won't speak to anyone specifically off the top of my head, but they had some type of an encounter, whether it was a UFO or whether it was a spiritual encounter, which they perceived to be otherworldly entities, and they shared those experiences with the greater world, and people were receptive to that. And you get into that position where, okay, I'm kind of a star on the scene. People are listening to me, and I have a greater message about universal love and these type of things. And there's a tendency with some people to
come up with new material.
Yeah.
So, Adam and Greg, several chapters, several of the personalities that are described, contactees in your book, they say that when they encountered these aliens that they were offered food or drink, and I don't think any of them turned it down. They all took it, and I'm thinking of Washington Irving, kind of a scenario where they feel really, really good. Weren't they worried about cosmic roofies or something like that? I don't know which he wants to.
I can't speak for them, but yeah, there's some interesting stories there from Joe Simonton to Orfeo Angelucci. They imbibed of what was presented to them.
And none of them ever said, boy, this really tastes terrible.
Well, I don't think Joe Simonton thought much of the pancakes he was served.
Yeah, he said they tasted
right.
like cardboard.
That's right, yeah. You do go into in the book the connection or possible connection to hallucinogenics, psychedelics, and a lot of the people who gathered down there in the desert were into that. Yeah, as you note, they were sort of precursors to what we'd call hippies today, exploring the outer edges of consciousness and other realms of reality through mushrooms or peyote or whatever. Did you get a sense from any of your contactees that that was a way to contact the others?
With some of them, yeah, it became a thing, especially later on in the, in the 70s or late 60s or 70s. That kind of became part of the, so I've been told, the giant rock scene. And, there was some interesting experiences. I mentioned Orfeo Angelucci. He was one of the really early contactees and had some, what came across as quite genuine experiences. And, those had to do with, on his first UFO sighting, he was coming back home from work, and quite a few of these guys. I'm thinking of Van Tassel. He worked in the aviation industry, which is kind of interesting. You can start drawing some conspiracies here, but on his way back from work one day, he saw some saucers and stopped and noticed on the bumper of his car some elixir, which he afterwards drank, and that kind of set him on his path of discovery.
I know that at least one case, I think it was Howard Menger, you say in the book that his tune changed over the years. That years later he said, look, I recognize that maybe this was government agents planting this story, that they were fooling us. Greg, any indication that he was onto something?
Well, there might have been. In the mid-'90s, I interviewed a man named Mario Pozzoglini. He said he had spoken with Ivan Sanderson, I believe, who was old paranormal researcher, classic paranormal researcher. He said he was at Menger's farm in New Jersey, where he used to have these meetings. And he said he went into a basement somewhere, and there were a lot of things that said U.S. Army or something on them. And he said Menger got very upset with him and said to get out of there. And that was some indication that maybe something was going on that was beyond just the innocent contactee scene. And the other thing was later Menger himself said that he sort of recanted and said, well, maybe my mind was controlled, or maybe I dreamed some of it or whatever. But then he recanted that later in life and went back to saying, no, the space brothers really did contact me. So it seemed to, change with who was accusing him or how he felt at the time or how his life was going or whatever. So he kind of vacillated between saying they were real, saying they were imaginary, saying they were made up, saying the government had made him do it or was studying him so that they could find out how people reacted to such a thing. Because of the threat of subversion and communism and all that.
Somewhere along the line, as you guys note in the book, the overall message changed. Instead of the positive, peaceful messages of the Space Brothers, it became a very dark scenario, and in which these aliens didn't look like Aryans or Nordics. They looked like little grays who did terrible things, take people out of their homes, and perform all kinds of probes that were not pleasant by any means. What was going on there? Adam, do you have a thought?
Well, that definitely happened at one point in the story, and in the introduction we write about trying to encapsulate the period of the contactees and when they moved into the abductees. And, just for conversation's sake, I pointed out 1978 seemed to be an important year because that's when George Van Tassel died, and there was a lot of mystery behind his death. You hear different internet rumors that he was almost done with the Integratron, which would be like a rejuvenation device or, this free energy device that would set us free, and something sinister went down. And around that time, 78, 79, 80, is when this meme, the dark age of ufology started. And I point to Greg's book on Paul Benowitz, and a lot of those things started happening with these stories. That's when the alien graves appeared in underground bases. So there was definitely, I sense, a change in that late 70s, 1980s period when we went from the golden age of the contactees to the more sinister abductees.
Gentlemen, do you get a sense, how often do these beings convey sort of spiritual, religious viewpoints, and are there any of these cases, I don't remember from the book, but are there any where they're in conflict with our own predominant religions?
Not really. No, they're I think they're coming through the lens of our religions, just because they have to come through the lens of our cultures and the way we deal with things spiritually. It's just interpreted in slightly different ways, which is why I said earlier, I think the people that were unhappy with the religion that was being preached to them would go to some of these religions, because many of them were basically based in Christianity. In fact, almost all of them. They just have a different viewpoint of it. The only one I can think of that's right now that's way off with Christianity is probably the Raelians, and to some extent maybe Eastern based, like George King and the Aetherius Society.
Well, Adam Gorightly, Greg Bishop, the book is called Welcome back to Coast. I'm George Knapp. Robert Salas served almost 7 years as an active duty in the Air Force until resigning in 1971. From 71 to 73, he worked for Martin Marietta Aerospace and Rockwell International on space shuttle design proposals. Takes it much further than that and casts a much wider net. Bob Salas, good to have you back on the program.
Thank you, George. Great to be with you. Thank you.
I enjoyed the new book, and I want to start with this. Before we get into sharing with those listeners who have not heard the story about your particular encounter, I was impressed by something that I saw in the preface, where you deal with the idea of government secrecy, or more about the idea of the government as an entity, and making the point that it's not one massive organism that moves as one. Talk about that for a minute.
Well, yeah. If we're talking about the UFO cabal, or
well, yeah, I'm more like about you make a point that and the government isn't just one entity that operates with one mind. It's a lot of different things and has a lot of different priorities. You worked for it for 32 years, right?
Oh, absolutely. I think I've got 35 years of government service total, but. Yeah, absolutely. With regard to the Air Force, I criticize the Air Force for not being forthcoming about the UFO phenomenon, but really I'm just talking about a very small part of the Air Force, and then there are intelligence agencies and all of the military agencies that are also involved. There's something like 17 different intelligence agencies operating in the government. And I think one or more of them, maybe most of them have some interest in this phenomenon.
Well, you make the point, separate from the UFO discussion, that there are too many secrets. Too much stuff is classified as secret. They keep too many things private, and it hurts our country and the world in many different ways.
Yes, absolutely. One of the ways, of course, is secret science, which I talk about. Going back some 10 or so years, the scientists who were studying the global warming issue were given access to data from spy satellites, but the government didn't allow them to use this data in writing papers because it was classified. So that's one way that excessive secrecy keeps actually real science from coming out. But again, I go into many other ways where excessive secrecy really breeds corruption within government. And there's so many people in government right now that have the ability to to issue classified documents and to keep those secrets for practically no reason, almost on a whim.
Well, we'll come back to secrecy as it applies to UFOs and disclosure a little bit later, but let's get into a little of your background. This is, I've been reading about you for a long time. I think we've met before and have seen your testimony and have always been impressed by the story and that you've told and your candidness and honesty. But I never knew that you were at the Air Force Academy.
Yeah, I graduated in 1964.
Was it tough? It must have been tough to get in.
Well, actually, it was. In fact, I was accepted the first time I tried. I had to compete, and then I found out I had a kind of a cyst on my backside and had to be removed because they didn't like that sort of thing. So I had to compete all over again the next year. So I actually had to win the competition twice, but finally got in. And then once I was in, of course, it's a tough hoe to even finish the program. It was strenuous, but highly rewarding, and I'm very proud of being a graduate of the Air Force Academy.
Was there ever any discussion about UFOs while you were there? I ask the question in this context. There's a famous chapter from an Air Force Academy textbook, a physics textbook, that was made public some years ago by UFO researchers. Once they found it and made it public, it was pulled from the curriculum. But you know what I'm talking about?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I think that was 1968, a few years after I graduated. But while I was there was certainly no discussion about UFOs.
None at all. Not even if there was a story in the newspaper or something.
Nothing at all. Absolutely nothing.
But it is, as you tell in this book, though, some of the people you met at the academy, you think that they might have been involved later. We'll skip ahead a little bit. You ended up at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base later on, right?
Yeah, I was at Wright-Patterson in the summer of '69. And, of course, in January of '69, the Air Force decided to shut down Blue Book. Well, after I got to Wright-Pat, I ran into one of my classmates. Actually, was a year ahead of me. Glad to see me and said they had a job for me. I said, well, I was just there to finish my master's degree. He said, well, we'll talk later. And then about a week later, I get a call from the base psychiatrist's office. And I hadn't complained about any mental problems. So that was kind of strange. But I was ordered to go to the base psychiatrist's office, and I actually refused to go in and see the psychiatrist unless he explained to me why I was there. And finally, they just told me to leave. I think what might have happened, and I'm just guessing, of course, but it's strange. In '69, they still had UFO projects at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. We know that the Air Force investigation of UFO phenomena continued after 1969, even though they told the public that they were shutting down. But I think what might have happened is they might have tried to recruit me if I went in there and talked about the UFO incident, which happened in 1967.
Yeah, by that point, they would have known about your history.
Right, exactly. And this is actually typical of how they deal with witnesses, these types of events. They actually track witnesses. They find out, what they're up to, where they are, because, of course, the last thing they want is, and by they I'm talking about the people that are keeping these secrets, the last thing they want is for witnesses to get together and compare notes and, nail down the facts, which I think I was finally able to do after many, many years of investigating.
But you think that they attach something to a file, for example?
Absolutely. I think of course, they knew all the principals involved when I had my Malmstrom event. They knew the names of all the principals, my commander, myself, and the guards upstairs, etc. And I think with the airmen, a lot of them, they dispersed to different bases. That's another thing they do, is they disperse witnesses so that they won't, again, group together and compare notes. So, yeah, I think they had tracked me.
One of the premises of your book, I mean, you start where Blue Book left off. Project Blue Book is canceled in 1969. The Air Force issues a statement that basically says, look, because we can't find any evidence that UFOs are a threat to national security, we're not going to study this anymore. And then there was another secret memo from a General Bolander that said all national security cases will go to the same place they've always gone. So you use that as sort of a starting point for this book because you know from personal experience that there are cases involving UFOs and national security, and you saw it. You lived through it.
I sure did. I had another crew. There were two incidents at Malmstrom, one in March 16th, 67, mine in March 24th, 1967. And I have the testimony of Walt Fiegel, who was himself a full colonel in the Air Force eventually. At the time, he was a lieutenant, obviously. And I've got him on audio tape. If people want to listen to his statement about UFOs shutting down his missiles, they can go to my website, spiralgalaxy.org, and I've got that on audio tape with his permission, of course. And my commander was Fred Mywald, who also I have on audio tape, confirming the fact that our missiles shut down and that UFOs were seen at the time over.
Well, set the scene. You went to Malmstrom. How long were you there, and what was your job?
I was there for 3 years. I started at Malmstrom in 1966, the summer of 66, and stayed till the summer of 69. I was a missile launch officer. First, I was a deputy on a two-man crew, and then I became a full commander of a crew later on. But when we had the incident March 24th, we were on duty underground, capsule, 60 feet underground. We had about 6 guards upstairs. We were locked in for 24 hours until we were relieved by another crew. So, I couldn't go upstairs and verify this strange object that was reported. And while this object was up there, the missile shut down. They went into a no-go condition. They were disabled. And this was reported by the guards upstairs. We had 6 guards, and they had all the weapons drawn up there. They were frightened to death.
Yeah, you write in this book that they were sending messages down, which by itself was kind of unusual, I guess, or the nature of the messages, right?
The nature of the messages was they were seeing very strange lights in the sky, flying at high speeds, making unusual turns, and non-aircraft and making no noise. So this was unusual. Typically, they're very professional, and our communications, we did not joke around too much out there. It was all business because they had nuclear weapons to worry about.
So I guess, it's safe to say that it's not just everybody gets this assignment. You're going to be down in there. You're in charge of nuclear weapons. If things go bad and they have to be launched, you're the guys to do it.
Yeah, that's right. And we were prepared to do just that.
So you're cream of the crop guys. You're trusted with the nation's most powerful weapons, not the kind of guys that go off on flights of fancy.
I hope not. No, we weren't. No, actually, at the time, my commander and I had the ability to launch 10 nuclear missiles if we had decided to do that. With or without a confirming message from above, we could have physically done that. Of course, we wouldn't, but we could have. And so it was a very responsible position. I think now they've got much more safeguards to protect against that sort of thing. But
so the guys up top are telling you, screaming into the radio, hey, there's something weird floating around over the base. At the same time that these lights are over the base and over the missile silo, the missiles are disabled in your silo, and then you were to learn later in more, right?
Exactly. After we reported our shutdown to the wing command post, they told us that the same thing had happened about a week earlier at another flight called Echo Flight. And again, all 10 missiles shut down. UFOs were seen there by the security guards and the maintenance people that had remained remained there overnight to work on those missiles, and they reported seeing these objects.
How long was it down?
Well, the missiles were, I want to emphasize, they weren't damaged. They were disabled, meaning that the guidance package, the guidance and control system, was no longer viable. What these objects would have had to do was send some kind of a specific signal through 60 feet of earth and concrete, and then penetrate our triply shielded cables going to each of the missiles separately, and affect a piece of equipment we call the logic coupler, which is part of the guidance package. And all that did was upset the targeting system, so that the missiles could not be launched. Otherwise, they wouldn't have known where to go, basically.
Robert Salas, I would imagine that even without the presence of UFOs, when a nuclear missile silo, let alone 10, is somehow disabled, it sets off alarm bells and people are freaking out.
Yeah, absolutely. I was there for 3 years, like I mentioned. I never had more than one missile go down for any reason, and but absolutely, this losing 10 within a matter of seconds. One of the documents we got back from the Air Force under the Freedom of Information Act was telex from SAC headquarters to all units saying that this was of grave concern. They used those words, grave concern, to this command. They needed to know what happened, why it happened, and right away. They started investigating this. The Air Force did, and also they requested Boeing, which was the prime contractor on the Minuteman, to formulate an investigation also. So,
how quickly did that start? I mean, are you the very next day? Are you and the guy who was down there with you? Are you hauled up and questioned, or how long did it take?
Well, as far as the crews were concerned, I'll speak about our crew because I know about that a little bit better. But we were ordered back to our squadron commander his office as soon as we were relieved. In fact, they had a helicopter come out for us, and we walked into that office, and first thing I asked was this some kind of Air Force exercise? And he turned. He was white as a sheet, said absolutely not. And then there was a man from AFOSI there who just shoved a piece of paper in our faces and said, sign here. It was a statement that we would never talk about this again to anyone. We both signed that, and after that, we heard nothing about this investigation. We were not asked about it further. We heard nothing more. And we had briefings on a regular basis. Every time we went on alert, they gave us briefings on what was going on in the field. Now, a little bit different experience with the Echo flight, which happened about a week earlier, like I said. They were actually interviewed by people from SAC headquarters, came to Malmstrom and interviewed them. So they had a little bit different experience. What I need to say here is that at the same time that our incident occurred, the Air Force was conducting so-called scientific investigation of the UFO phenomenon. This was the Condon investigation, which
right.
I'm sure you're well aware of.
Right.
That started in August of '66 and went through the end of '68, I think, when they wrote their final report. That was ongoing while this incident, during this incident, and part of the reason the Air Force had asked for this is so they could whitewash the UFO subject and not have to respond to the public about it, and they didn't want our incidents to muddy that water. So I'm pretty sure that one of the reasons we were not further involved in any investigation because they wanted to cover it up as much as they could.
Yeah, you would think if the Condon investigation was an honest investigation, this would be Exhibit A. It would be a primary a case for them to look into, and it would be explored. Even if they wanted to just explain it away, it would at least find its way into the report.
Right. And in fact, the chief investigator of the county committee, a man by the name of Dr. Roy Craig, learned about the Malmstrom shutdowns from Ray Fowler. Ray Fowler was working for Sylvania Corporation at the time. Sylvania had some of the electrical contracts on the Minuteman, and he had reps in the field that reported to him that this was a UFO event. So Ray Fowler contacted the Condon investigator and said he had information that this was a UFO event. Craig went down there and talked to Fowler. Fowler gave him names and numbers to call and people see. But when Craig showed up at Malmstrom in October of '67, he was told by the deputy base commander, base operations officer, a man by the name of Colonel Chase, that there was no UFO involvement. And Craig basically turned around and went home. They did not pursue the investigation of the missile shutdowns.
Let's talk a bit about causes, what could have caused it. I mean, obviously, you think there's a connection between the UFO sightings and the equipment going down. What was the official explanation? I mean, it hadn't happened before, except when the UFOs were around. Hasn't it certainly appears that there's a connection between those appearances and the malfunction, but is there some other explanation? Is there some kind of connection between these silos, the 10 different missiles? Because I would think that they'd all have to be built to operate independently.
They were independent systems. These were located about a mile or so away from each other and about a mile or so from the Central Launch Control Center. The Air Force, for the documents we got under the Freedom of Information Act, the Air Force was never able to pinpoint a cause for the shutdowns. They pinpointed the piece of equipment that was affected, and they were actually able to simulate on a bench test how that equipment could have failed, but they could not explain how. They did determine there was an external source that affected that piece of equipment, but they could not explain how that source got into the system. Right after I appeared, as a matter of fact, on Coast to Coast in 1996, I spoke with Linda Moulton Howe. She got me started on this. And as a result of that show, I got a call from Robert Kaminsky, who's head of the Boeing investigative team. And he kept in communication with us and told us that they looked at every possible scenario, including power surges, computer malfunctions, even psychological things having to do with the crew, et cetera, and they could not come up with a viable cause for these shutdowns. I've also heard from other military sources that the Air Force was studying this incident up until 1972, and they still had not come up with a cause as to how a signal was injected into the system.
Well, you just think about it. I mean, they've got to know for a couple of reasons. One is so that they can stop it from happening again. And two is if there's some technology that could do that, they'd like to be able to probably do it to the Russians or the Chinese or our adversaries.
Well, sure. And that technology happens to be extraterrestrial. And if they are able to, if they have been able to, after all these years, determine how that worked, then, yeah, they might want to be interested in applying that, military applications for that.
Bob, how many of your fellow servicemen who were there for this incident have you sort of collected their information? You mentioned about the guy who was in the silo with you. He went on to be a colonel, and his tape testimony is on your website. How many others who were there have you now had contact with who are willing to verify the story?
Well, a couple of main witnesses, other witnesses are Arnie Arneson, who was a cryptographic officer at Malmstrom Air Force Base at the time, and he recalls seeing a telex stating that UFOs were seen during the missile shutdown. Another important witness is Bob Jameson, who was a targeting officer that went out and brought the Oscar flight back up on alert. In other words, they had to go out there and physically retarget the missiles. And so it involved procedure. It took a day or so to get those missiles back up, but he was told actually by his superiors that this was a UFO event. And in fact, there were a famous UFO case called the Belt incident involving a truck driver and Montana Highway Patrolman that saw this craft land near Malmstrom Air Force Base the same day the Oscar flight went down. So, yeah, there are other witnesses. One gentleman who wants to remain anonymous because of his current position, as many witnesses do. But he was in the Echo flight, trying to bring back one of the Echo flight missiles back up on alert, going through his checklist procedures when an object came over, UFO, and actually he went down and tried to finish his. After they reported this, he tried to finish the startup procedure for the missile, and each time he went to a particular point in his checklist, the missile would shut down again. Again, this object was overhead while he was doing this. And he concluded that this was an intelligently controlled object that knew exactly how our systems worked. So, yeah, there are others, witnesses, but again, it's difficult for some of these people to come forward.
Do you have witnesses that have come forward who say, "Now Bob Salas is making it up"? It seems to me that I've seen some correspondence with Robert Hastings, who writes about UFOs and nukes, where people, and I don't know if it's the Malmstrom incident or others, where there are members of the relatives of the servicemen who were there who say, "No, that's not what happened," who dispute the veracity of this.
You're probably thinking of James Carlson, who's this Eric Carlson. Eric Carlson was the commander at Echo Flight. James Carlson has claimed that I'm lying or not telling the truth about this, etc. I have spoken with him. I have sent him my evidence. I have, and actually, if you go to my website, you'll see a couple of pieces of correspondence from Eric Carlson, the commander at Echo Flight, who was there when the missile shut down, and he coordinated the statements made by Walt Fiegel, again, the deputy whose audio tape says that, yeah, UFOs were there. He corroborated those statements of Fiegel. So James, I don't know what his problem is, but he has nothing really to back up anything that challenges my facts.
Well, you now know that there's a whole lot of other incidents through your work, through Robert Hastings' work, through some stuff that I've done. There have been incidents at other nuclear missile bases in the U.S., other nuclear missile bases in other parts of the world.
Absolutely. In 2010, Hastings and I organized a conference in Washington, D.C., and we had a man by the name of Pat McDonough, who was actually a missile targeting guy who, in 1966, again, reported UFO overhead at Malmstrom Air Force Base. Bruce Fenstermacher, 1976, again, UFOs over his missile sites. He was a deputy launch commander, same as I was. Jerry Nelson. This was in 63, Atlas Missile System near Walker Air Force Base, which was originally Roswell Air Force Base. Again, UFOs repeated over many nights seen over the missile sites. Colonel Holt of
Bentwaters
Forest fame,
yeah.
yes. Again, these were nuclear facilities at Bentwaters Base. And again, in 2013, during the citizens' hearing on disclosure, I was able to bring in a couple of new witnesses. Dave Shindeli, Minot Air Force Base, 1966. A very similar incident to mine, although the principals were not named, but he relieved the crew who claimed that UFOs shut down their missiles at Minot in 66. David Scott, another airman, I think that was Ellsworth Air Force Base. There have been many incidents involving UFOs and nuclear weapons.
There's an incident that I shared with Robert Hastings and shared with him, in fact, the original documents that I got from the Ministry of Defense in Russia, an incident in 1982 in the Ukraine where UFOs appeared over this ICBM base of theirs, danced around, performed these incredible maneuvers over a period of 4 hours. These gigantic craft, they would split into pieces and then meld back together and appear and disappear and all this stuff, and then they entered launch control codes. They entered codes that enabled the missiles. They were ready to go. And then, poof, the UFOs go away, and at the same time, the equipment goes back to normal. Big investigation is launched by the Ministry of Defense in Moscow. They can't figure out what caused it. They concluded that the UFOs did it, that the UFOs entered these codes, as if to send sort of a message. If there's a message being sent, Bob, what is it?
Well, of course, this is speculative, but I do believe the message is simply get rid of your nuclear weapons. These weapons are extremely dangerous to civilization as we know it, obviously. The weapon, each nuclear weapon that we had on our missiles was 800 kilotons. To put that in perspective, the weapons that dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki were just 15 kilotons. These are enormously destructive weapons of mass destruction. They're not of any use for any kind of a war. It was even Truman made the statement that we could not have a war with nuclear weapons. It would just be completely devastating.
Yeah, be the end of the world. And
yeah.
Or they could be saying, look, these may be your most powerful weapons, but they're not all that impressive to us. We can stop them anytime we want. That's a pretty powerful message, too.
Well, I think, but I think basically they want us to do it. I think they would like to see us evolve to a point where, we recognize the fact that we're on the brink of destroying our civilization and that we have to take that action to get rid of them.
Well, you've read about the exchanges between Reagan and Gorbachev in those years when Reagan was president, how they said, boy, we got to, wouldn't it be something if we had to unite against a common enemy? And we also have read reports both from Russia and the U.S. In which they said we need to exchange information so that some UFO incident doesn't launch World War III.
Exactly, yeah. And that's why I believe that there is an exchange of information going on worldwide on the UFO phenomenon. However, I think it's being done through intelligence groups within those countries.
Sort of a back channel instead of a front channel.
Yeah, right.
Welcome back. John Ventre is the Pennsylvania State Director for the Mutual UFO Network, MUFON. He's the author of a couple of books, UFOs Over Pennsylvania, and the one he was here to talk about the last time he was my guest, An Alternative History of Mankind.
Hey, thanks for having me on, George.
So I want to start with this transformation. In the new book, in Chapter 5, you note that in 2014, you published An Alternative History of Mankind, and, quote, I was so sure humans were the result of alien intervention and genetic manipulation. It made a lot of sense. Evolution didn't add up, and you hadn't stepped into a church in more than 20 years. Give me is there one incident that sort of led to this change, or is it the accumulation of a bunch of incidents that we're going to talk about tonight?
Well, it's a couple of things, George. 2.5 years ago, the West Virginia State Director, Fred Saluga, he kept bringing up about, the hybrid program. And he kept asking, well, why is it going on for so long, hundreds of years? Why, when they take DNA, they can't just clone it? It doesn't make sense. And then I had Nick Redfern at my 2014 Pittsburgh UFO conference, and I was telling him about an experience I had that June, which to me was very, very different. I felt it went into the demonic area. And he said, well, read my book, Final Events. So when I read that, I never heard of the Collins Elite. So, that started to change my opinion. And, George, I've read about 60 books, if not more, in the last 2 years. And, you start in this field and you believe in the nuts and bolts. They're from outer space. It's the extraterrestrial hypothesis. Now, I do believe there's life in space. I absolutely believe they've been here. You see it in rock carvings, petroglyphs, etc. But something seemed to change somewhere in the 80s or the 90s. And I'm actually very surprised when I've read so many of these authors that when you read them from the 60s and 70s, they took a demonic spin to this. Arthur C. Clarke, Whitley Strieber, Carla Turner, Guy Malone, Joe Jordan, John Keel, L.A. Marzulli, even Hynek and Vallée and Mack say this is interdimensional. So my thinking started to change. And then, as you know from my book, I had some encounters that I've had encounters my whole life.
Yeah, we're going to go into those. We're going to go into them. But I guess what I was looking for, so it was a gradual process over the last couple of years that led you to make this change, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I still say the UFO thing's real, life in space is real, but I absolutely question the abduction.
All right. Well, give me the thesis statement, and then we're going to get into some examples of the things that have happened to you and your family. Give me sort of the general thesis of your book. I mean, it's called The Ufologist, so it certainly sounds like you're still on that same page to some degree. You still have the position with MUFON, but things are different for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I absolutely question the abduction, the hybrid program. I say that when it goes into the altered states, and I give information in that book comparing the alien abduction to the demonic possession. And nobody's ever really done that before. Matter of fact, I made a list up of the markers of both, and I sent it to Kathy Martin, and about half of the markers are the same. And I just recently read Kenneth Ring's book where he compared near-death experience to alien abduction. Totally different, but I find the alien abduction very similar to demonic possession. And I say when you go into that altered state, you're not dealing with an extraterrestrial, an ambassador from space. You're dealing with a malevolent interdimensional entity.
Interdimensional and demon, not necessarily the same thing, right?
Well, they could and they could not be. I think all of this is interdimensional. I view interdimensional as heaven is a dimension, hell is the dimension. Physicists say there's 11 dimensions. We live in 3 plus time. I don't know what's in the other 7. And I think that's where all of these creatures that are seen, Bigfoot, werewolves, all of these things that I've seen through history, I think they're coming through these other dimensions.
I know you referenced Jacques Vallée a couple of times in the book, and I asked you that last question only just to be specific, is that although he has championed the idea of the interdimensional thing for a long time, and in fact has persuaded people like me and a heck of a lot of folks who have been around the topic for a long time that this is something that goes beyond mere space visitors coming here from another planet, he does not exactly endorse the idea of demons, right? I mean,
no, I agree with you. Yeah, that's why I separated Hynek, Vallée, Mack, talk interdimensional. Those other authors have all referenced a demonic tone to their books.
Yeah, it's a lot in common. Your thesis has a lot in common, and you mentioned the name of John Keel a couple of times in the book. I mean, you guys do cross paths on the kind of topics that you consider.
Yeah, and I'll be honest with you, George, when I look at it now, I think I bond more with John Keel than any of the other authors. He keeps coming back to demonic, which I call it an interdimensional malevolent entity. We call it, demonology. And it's funny, I just read another one of his books, and there's a quote in there where he says, if you look into UFOs long enough, you will experience demons. And I'm like, I fell back in my chair. I said, well, isn't that exactly what's been happening?
I can remember having this conversation with other folks at UFO conferences over the years, and, there's an initial period where you want to think, come on, really, demons? But what the heck is the difference? I mean, it is some kind of an intelligence. It comes from somewhere else. It behaves in malevolent ways. And maybe we don't have exactly the right word for what it is, but I think that's as good an explanation as any.
Yeah, well, I tell you, it's malevolent. That is the best word for it. You can call it the jinn. You can call it demons. I'm telling you, what I experienced over the last 2 years is absolutely malevolent. What happened to my daughter was malevolent. And I really looked at this abduction, and when you go into the altered state, that is, I'm convinced that's not an extraterrestrial. We're dealing with something else.
Well, let's start talking about your life, because this is an incredible litany of experiences you've had, and I would think maybe this would have occurred to you before now, that maybe, as you explain in the biographical part of this book, you jumped into this, I think, in the late 90s looking at UFOs, whereas when you look at some of the things that have happened to you from a young age, I'm not sure that's where I would have gone to look for answers.
Yeah. Well, the thing I can say about this is when something has happened, nothing would happen again for 3, 4, 5 years. I had a 16-year period where nothing happened from age 16 to 32. So, you live in your life, one thing happens, it's very strange, and then nothing happens again. So you kind of look at it, your logical mind says, well, it's something else, and you move on. But it seemed to progress. And what the things I thought may have been out-of-body experiences, well, they were, and, could have been an alien abduction maybe, and we'll talk about those hybrid kids, et cetera. I just see it in a different light based on what happened over the last 2 years.
Well, let's start at a young age, though, because you had some stuff growing up that's pretty weird.
Yeah, I mean, George, this has been with me since 4 years old, and you question yourself, and it's funny when I tell people what's happened. The first question is, "What did you do?" Well, I didn't do anything, because this started at 4 years old. I didn't commit a major sin. I didn't do anything to bring in the devil. I've always been interested in the paranormal, in horror movies, that type of stuff. But, to look at my life, 4 years old, and I remember it, George, like it was yesterday. I'm laying in bed. We were living in Brooklyn. Something grabs my feet, both ankles. I scream. Door opens. There's my mother. There's my father. There's my brother. And I remember it. I said, well, what grabbed my ankles? I won't sleep with an arm or a leg hanging over the bed. So then, and this is my example. That's 1961. Okay, nothing happens again. 1969. So that's 8 years later. I'm living in Richmond Hill, Queens, and I have 4 nights of out-of-body experiences. I'm floating above the neighborhood. Every night I go further. I see all my friends' houses. I see the whole neighborhood. I just go further and further.
It's not a dream. Not a dream?
No. Well, I was asleep. No, I was definitely asleep. So you can call it a lucid dream. It was clearly me flying. It was out of body.
Have you ever had any training for the out-of-body stuff or tried to do it?
No, I never tried to create that situation.
All right.
But,
so what's next?
Yeah. And then, so now you go a couple of years further, right? 1971. My grandmother passes away. A couple of hours before she passes away, I'm in my room, and I clearly hear a female voice, like a moan, right outside my door. I mean, I jumped up, I bolted the door. My parents, my brother, sister came home. They were at the hospital. A couple hours later, we get a call. She passed away. I'm convinced that was her soul leaving her body before she died. Then 2 years after that, again, I have a lucid dream. I was sleeping. I played a doubleheader softball. I laid down. I fell asleep. I have this dream where I go down. I'm outside my backyard. I open the back door. I go down. It's a cave. I go down the cave, and something is coming up. And this is the first time I felt I was in the presence of a demonic, malevolent entity. I turned around. I'm trying to obviously, and I know I'm asleep. I'm asleep when this is happening. I'm trying to run back up to the door. Something is behind me. It's like breathing on me. I can feel the evil. I said to myself in my mind, don't turn and look at it. I'm able to move my finger. I wake up, and I'm drenched in sweat, and my heart's beating like 180 beats a minute. I really felt that if I had looked at that, I probably would have died in my sleep in that dream. That was the first time it turned really malevolent to me.
I want to, we're going to be going to a break here, but I want to talk about some of the instances that you have where you are awake, because there's one in particular coming up when you're 21 years old, a creature that you see. And this is not some dream. This is not a dream state at all. It's something you see for sure, and it was pretty strange. It's one in a long line of strange things that happened to you. We're talking with John Ventre about his new book, The Ufologist, The Haunting of John Ventre. Let's go back to you're 21 years old, and you have an experience. You're not asleep. You just got married. You're awake, and you see this weird thing. What is it?
No. Nothing happened at 21. From 16 to 32, there was nothing that happened. So tell me.
Well, I'm on page 12 of your book. You says at age 21, I married my high school sweetheart, who was just 19. We stayed at a honeymoon suite at the Sheraton at the JFK airport. You're standing on the balcony and enjoying the Halloween night air.
Oh, okay. Let me clarify. The first two chapters of the book, and I said that in both chapters, was a theatrical version of what really happened to me, for let's say to make a movie out of or a screenplay, and that later in the book I tell you the factual what actually happened. So the 21, that part that's like a little novella that starts the book, but I made it very clear that was not not what really happened. If you want to jump forward in time, I can tell you about some other events.
Yeah, well, let me ask you this then, because you may have made it clear, but it wasn't clear to me. So why don't you tell me about experiences that you had where your family also saw things in the house?
Yeah. Well, probably the best thing. Well, when we lived in Oklahoma, my wife and I, we heard 3 sets of 3 footsteps upstairs. Really, it was in the ceiling above us. So she was present when we heard that. But when we moved from Oklahoma, that was in Oklahoma, when we moved to New Jersey, I mean, George, the day we moved in, my parents came over to see the house. The moving boxes are sliding around the garage floor. It's a very distinctive sound. You can hear the boxes sliding around. My wife's personality is changing now. We ended up getting divorced while we were there in New Jersey. We're in the house. My sister, her family's over. She's screaming, "John, come downstairs." There's a black shadow moving across the ceiling. Later on, after the divorce, we're still in New Jersey. I'm with my girlfriend. Again, I see this dark shadow come down the hallway and across the ceiling. And we both looked at each other and said, how's that possible? I mean, there's one nightlight on the end table, and you see this black shadow just move across the ceiling. At the same time, my daughter And I didn't find this out until later after I decided to write this book. My daughter said, "Dad, when we lived in Jersey, I would hear a rocking chair and a baby, a rocking chair going and a baby crying in the spare bedroom." My girlfriend at the time told me the same thing, independently of her. My son, he would sleep. He said, "Dad, when I would go to sleep at night, I would hear a voice in the wall behind the headboard say, 'I'm going to get you.'" And then he said one time he was brushing his teeth after I had moved out, and the cat's on the bathroom counter. He's brushing his teeth. He said he saw this hairy creature walk right past the door down the hallway. Both the cat and him turned at the same time. He said he jumped over the banister into the living room, and he ran out of the house. So that was in New Jersey, and that's where I'm telling you, that was just that house. It was just so creepy living there. But then I ended up moving to Pennsylvania, and the minute I moved into this house, constantly there's this tapping on the wall in the hallway. I remember I just moved in. I would get up at night. I'd walk down the hallway. I'd hit the wall. It would stop. I'd walk away. It would start again. Constant tapping. And then I went to, now at this time I wasn't a member of MUFON. I had been researching end-time prophecy to write my first book, which was a novel. And I joined MUFON in 98 because of different things I read while I was researching end-time prophecy. I wanted to look into UFOs. So I go to my first UFO conference in 1999. And the symposium, the MUFON symposium, was in basically D.C., Northern Virginia. I come home from the symposium, and I go to sleep, and now I have 4 nights of the worst lucid dreams, that malevolent feeling that something's in the room. I'm waking up swinging my fist at the air. I have these dreams where, I have an out-of-body experience again. I'm floating above my house. And then I have these dreams where my dog, I have a Doberman, he's floating in the air with his legs sticking out horizontally. There's a kid poking him in the ribs. And I'm yelling at the kid, "Stop poking the dog," but he keeps poking him in the ribs. Now, the strange thing, George, is what I documented this. I wrote it down. At the time, the kid I wrote down, he kind of looked like a rat boy, really tight skin. The skin was pulled tight. He had that rat boy face. But my memory, years later, when I went to write this book, my memory was of this kid with large bulging eyes, real scraggly hair. He had really big forearms like Popeye, and the bone was sticking out 2 or 3 inches on the end. And it was funny, when I went to write this, that's my memory. And I pulled my notes out, and I got a completely different description of what that kid looked like. At the same time, my girlfriend, she actually got online and looked it up, and there was a UFO sighting at Penn State and Morgantown. My house is in direct line with that. So, George, this is where my confusion is, and I even spoke to Dr. David Jacobs about this, is it a UFO? Are these hybrid kids? He told me no. He said, what you're describing, this stuff happening, out-of-body experiences 30 years apart. He says that is not an alien abduction. So, but then I question, George, why? I used to go to horror cons, Comic Cons. I loved all of that stuff, and I didn't have this type of thing happen. Why the weekend I go to a UFO conference and come home, why do I have these lucid dreams? And this went on for 4 nights. There's absolutely a presence in the room, and I know I'm not seeing it, but in my dream, there were lucid dreams. I see that same hairy creature that my son saw, and he hadn't told me about it at this point. That's why I'm waking up and I'm swinging at it, and I'm hitting the headboard. I almost broke my wrist. So, and again, this is the confusion. Is it an alien abduction? Are these hybrid kids? Or is this something demonic? Because
do you think, John, you had mentioned that you've always had an interest in monsters and horror films and things like that. It's like a chicken and egg kind of question. Do you think you were drawn to those kinds of events and topics because you're having some kind of subconscious or unconscious experience, or it's vice versa?
Well, I think my father used to like that stuff. So as a kid, we'd sit and watch the Frankenstein movies and all the black and white movies. He really liked that stuff. But, as I analyze it, I go back to being 4 years old, 12 years old, 16 years old. Something had happened. And I had never had a Ouija board or tarot cards or, I've never done any of that stuff other than just watching movies. And I used to make my own Super 8 horror movies. I was really into it. But, it's really hard to figure out, George. And, to get versed in this field, it's almost like you need a PhD.
Yeah.
There are so many books.
What do you think? Give me your sense of it. What do you think is happening to you? Do you think that some of the experiences that you're remembering, little bits of, that you've been abducted? Or
I don't believe that now. I believe that this is a malevolent entity that has attached to me, and I think it's attached to me at an early age. And I think it may be a generational type curse or sin, because and I went through things in the book with my father. He served some time in prison. He killed a guy. He had knife fights. My grandparents, kind of shady background too. And and I've read, when you research this, there are generational sins, and they can actually claim a family line. And if they do possess 3-4 generations, they claim that family line. I really believe I'm dealing with something that attached at a very early age, that either claimed me before birth or at 4 years old, and I'm trying to break that.
I was reading the book and thinking, wow, how many guys in the world can live in this many haunted houses? But you seem to pick them, but it's not the house that's being haunted, it's you.
Yeah, absolutely. Matter of fact, I asked the priest that about a year ago, and we just did the Philly symposium, and when I did the Erie symposium and gave this talk, 2 people gave me their rosary beads, and at the Philly conference, which just ended yesterday, people came up to me and said, "How do you live in that house?" And I said, what the priest told me, it's not the house, it's me. They're attached to me. And the thing that really makes me angry is that my kids have had these same experiences. So, I'm determined to break this one way or another, and I think I have to go through the Catholic Church to do that.
Was there ever a point where your kid said, Dad's gone off his rocker? I guess not, because they've had the experiences through much of their lives as well.
Well, my son actually, a year or so ago, I was starting to tell him about this, and he says, "Dad, that sounds like schizophrenia." And I said, "Nolan, it's not, because the dog sees it. There's a huge bang on the wall. We both turn. Either I got kinetic energy or telepathy, which I don't think I have those powers, and other people have come over. They've seen the shadows. For 22 months, I've had birds flying into my windows, and we'll get into how that started and stopped. But there's witnesses to all of this."
Yeah. Well, let's tell the story about the bird part of it.
Okay. Well, what happened in 2014 is, and actually there were things prior to that were even very serious. But in 2014, I'm watching a baseball game. I go upstairs, and what I do is I open the attic door. The cool air comes in the evening. When I go upstairs, there's this powerful smell of something rotting upstairs. It's in the hallway, and I smell it in the bathroom also. So it smells like a dead animal. I put the bathroom fan on. I go downstairs. I'm watching the baseball game. I have a 108-pound Doberman, and he is the best guard dog in the world. He comes over. He kind of lays across my legs, and all of a sudden on the wall, boom! His head, my head, turns exactly at the same time. The picture on the wall flips up. I got 2 Indian headdresses on the sides of it. The feathers blow to the side. We go upstairs. I go upstairs to check after the game's over. It still smells, and it's right there in this one spot in the hallway. So, I turn the fan off. I go to bed. My dog turns around, He trots down the hallway. He looks up the attic stairs. George, he goes ballistic. I know when my dog barks and there's like somebody walking down the street, and I know when my dog barks and the UPS guy is standing there. This dog went ballistic like something was there. So I go and inspect. There's nothing there. I go back to bed. I put the weather on. I can see my dog because he sleeps on like a little bench there at the footboard. Again, in my bathroom, boom! I'm telling you, George, you can't make these sounds. They're like sonic booms. And the dog and I turn at the same time and hear it. Now, with that, which happened to be on the 20th anniversary of my divorce, these are not coincidences. These entities are intelligent. I think they're always around us when they pick you out. This started on June 6th of 2014, exactly 20 years after my divorce. So that's when the birds started the following day on June 7th. All of a sudden, I got these cardinals flying into my windows in the front of the house and my office. That's gone on for 22 months. I've had people come over. I showed them, look, the birds are flying in. I even had my publisher come up. You may know Richard Lang from the MUFON days.
Yes.
He sells annuities and insurance. He drove up from Virginia because I was going to buy some insurance policy and annuity. So he stayed over my house because he had to drive back to Virginia. And he says to me, John, there's birds flying into the window all night, chirping and flying into the window. I said, Rich, birds, they don't fly at night. They certainly don't sing at night either. So that went on for 22 months.
You said that there had been some things that were very serious that happened just before this whole episode happened. What were those?
Yeah. What I would say was the first one, and it seems to ramp up over time. And half of these things have happened at Thanksgiving. And it's funny. My son said to me, he pointed out, he said, Dad, do you realize half of the paranormal stuff that's happens at Thanksgiving? And that's not a coincidence, because in the divorce agreement, I got the kids for Thanksgiving, she got the kids for Christmas. And it seems to be when the three of us are together, these things happen. So Thanksgiving of 2004, my kids are over, my girlfriend's living with me, we all go to bed around midnight, and I close the bedroom door. I hear somebody in the hallway walking right up to the bedroom door. So, we fall asleep. My girlfriend goes to work the following morning. I get up, and on my mirror, and there's a picture of this in the book, there are two arm and handprints across the mirror like an X, crossing each other, 6 fingers on the hand, and what you see really is the bone of the forearm. So I measured it. It was 3 inches longer than my elbow to the fingertip, and I couldn't lean over the bathroom counter and put my arm and elbow there because the mirror was too high. So whatever made that had to be 7 feet tall. And I asked my son, I said, what were you doing outside my bedroom at midnight? And he was stunned, and he says, Dad, I heard you outside my bedroom at midnight. I thought that was you. So then after that, in 2009, I wake up at 5 in the morning, and I look down the hallway. My bedroom sits so I can see down the hallway. There's somebody standing there. And my attic light is on, so it's silhouetted. I have a finished attic. It's a regular, you walk up the stairs. The attic light's on. There's somebody standing there. It ain't human. The door frame's 6'8", so I'd say it's about 7 feet tall. It's very skinny, has about a 12-inch waist, very long arms and legs. It kind of reminds you of Crooked Man. It wasn't Slender Man because it wasn't in like a suit or anything. It's standing there, and it has a square head. So that's why I'm saying, is that a helmet? Is this an alien that's there? And, I rub my eyes. I crawl to the foot of the bed. So it's got to be 20 seconds into this now. And I'm looking. He's standing there. And I say to myself, step over the footboard and charge down the hallway. As soon as I thought that, the next thought into my head was, don't do that. That's unsafe. Step off the side of the bed and put the light on.
But there's only one author who gets his own shelf, is his own category. Wonders in the Sky, it's called. It looks at unexplained aerial objects from antiquity up until the dawn of the Industrial Revolution. And why are these old cases of any interest to anyone? I'll let Jacques Vallée explain that for himself. Jacques, great to have you here.
Good evening, George. Always a pleasure.
I had the pleasure of finishing the book yesterday. It's a wonderful book, and I hope a lot of people check it out. How do you sell this idea to a publisher? You know, you go in and say, hey, we're writing a book about UFOs, but we're only looking at cases that happened a long time ago and mostly in other countries pre-1900s.
It's not easy. It's not easy. But I think they remember Passport to Magonia, and there are publishers now who are knowledgeable about the subject and were intrigued with the approach that we took. And of course, when you start reading this material, it's like discovering a treasure. So I think the people at Torture Penguin caught on and became as enthusiastic as we were.
The argument could be made, and I'm sure it will be made by people who like to jump on this kind of stuff, that these cases are old. Some of them date back to like the 8th or 9th century. How do you give them any credence? There's no video. There's no photos. These were country bumpkins living in a non-technological age. Why should we even consider the cases?
That's the first reaction. If you remember, that's also the reaction people had initially to Passport to Magonia, that this is vague folklore. And, it's not vague folklore because, remember, these are the cases who went through history, down through history, all the way to us. And they were, for them to have been recorded the way they were recorded, they had to be felt to be very important to that civilization. The consuls in Rome made a rule that every year there had to be a record given to them of any unexplained object in the sky. And the reason for this was that they, for astrological reasons, it was felt that any strange object in the sky could announce new wars or the fall of empires, the fall of an emperor, and the birth of an exceptional person, and so on. Most of those, of course, were meteors and comets, which are very interesting to astronomers because we can now go back and trace back the Halley's Comet, for example, all the way to the Roman Empire. But many of those were unexplained. It's a little bit as if, President Obama said to the Air Force, I demand to have a quarterly report on UFOs on my desk at the White House. And those were very important. Some of those records were lost, but many of them had been saved by historians who republished them in their own books, and we were able to trace them. We separated the explainable cases, again, the meteors, the aurora borealis, the comets, and so on, from those that remained unexplained. And those were felt to be very important. We have many records that come from the records of the churches in different countries and different civilizations. We go back to a couple of Egyptian cases that were actually engraved in stone. So for somebody to go to the trouble of erecting a stela in the middle of the desert, saying this is where, the Pharaoh and his army saw this strange object in the sky, that must have been felt to be very important. These are actually better authenticated and better described in many cases than what you read in the newspaper every day.
Plus, it's you have to consider what you're weeding out. You purposely stop in the 1890s at the onset of the Industrial Revolution, before there were balloons, before there were airplanes, so that there could be no mistaking any of these cases for something that humans are flying. It's also long before there was any kind of disinformation or Photoshop or anything of that sort.
Absolutely, and some of those cases came from people who were leaders in science or in the arts. Michelangelo, for example, saw a triangle in the sky and painted it. The painting is lost, unfortunately, but it's known from art historians that he saw this and felt it was important enough for him to do a painting of it.
You have some 500 or more cases. How'd you gather them all, and how do you sift through them and in selecting the ones that are most pertinent?
Well, it's very simple. It takes 6 years, and it takes a network. Of course, this was only made possible by the Internet. I could not do that, I published Passport to Magonia 40 years ago, and everybody has criticized it with good reason, because there were some inaccuracies in the book, but nobody has redone it because it would be a lot of work to redo it. Let me tell you about my co-author, Chris Aubeck, because Chris is, this book in many ways is his work. He took the initiative. He did most of the historical research. He's a scholar, much younger than I am. So in a way, this is a generation transition here. He represents, I think, a new generation of people doing this kind of research on the paranormal, especially in Europe, who have a completely different view of the reality of the phenomenon and what it could mean. He's something of a cultural anthropologist and a student of history and language. He's an Englishman who lives in Madrid, and extremely precise in the research he does. And he contacted me because he wanted us to work to go over the material that I had started to nibble at in Passport to Magonia. When I wrote Magonia, I was well aware that I was just scratching the surface, that there must be scholars, there must be historians, museum curators, and so on, who were sitting on enormous reserves of information that was relevant. And, before then, I had pretty much followed the extraterrestrial approach. I mean, certainly my first contact with the problem was, we know there is life throughout the universe, there must be. And these objects look like spacecraft. Except that in science, you have to ask the question, when did it start? That's certainly one of the important questions, and it certainly did not start with Kenneth Arnold in 1947. It didn't start with the cloud cigars and the cigar-shaped objects in America during the 1897 wave, because we have records before then. So I started to look at this. But Chris had assembled a network of people, about 10 people, on the Internet from Russia and Latin America and the U.S. and Germany and so on, who were digging up sources in the literature. And we merged our databases, his and mine, and then we started using his network to go after original sources. And here you have to realize that in the literature there are some references to old cases, but they are they don't give you the original source. They say, 2 discs flew over London in 1800 and so on. Well, if you go back to the original source, it says there were 2 lights seen over London. It doesn't say anything about discs. So if you want an accurate picture, you have to go back in as many cases as you can to the original record, and that's what Chris and his team did. And then we started working and accumulating this. For every case, we stopped at 500 cases between antiquity and 1879, and for every case we kept, we rejected 5 or 10 that were actually just lights in the sky or meteors or could have been anything. And so it was a labor of love. Once we started, the material is just so fascinating that you get just drawn into it. It's absolutely beautiful.
Of course, a central message here, and I'll let you express it, but one of the central themes is that the same things basically have been seen for a long time, basically throughout human history, though we might use different terms to describe them. The people back there, in some of the cases in your book, refer to flying shields, not flying saucers. They talk about, in China, flying dragons, reflecting sort of cultural values of the time and place. Do you think these cases are reporting the same things that we see and report now, just describing them differently, or do you think these objects appear in different forms to reflect the times?
In this book, we're very careful not to. We don't even propose any theory. We just wanted to go over the material and put it before other scholars, we see this book as a beginning. In a way, Passport to Magonia was a beginning, but this is really a new beginning. We hope to alert. There must be a lot more that we haven't discovered. One of the beauties, of course, of the Internet today, and you know I'm a great fan of the Internet professionally, is that museums and newspapers and archives and so on are putting all their collections now online. So it's a lot easier to search through that material than it was, even 10 years ago. So we've actually done the best we could at producing this, but there must be a lot more. There must be, in the attics of castles in Germany and Austria and France and Britain, there must be piles of records and manuscripts and correspondence that should be looked at. And so we're trying to alert librarians and scholars and historians to note that material and record it and bring it to our attention. Also, of course, we're much better at reading French and English or German than reading, ancient Chinese or ancient writing from Japan. So we need to enlist the energy and the scholarship of people, of researchers in Asia and in other places in the world. So that's what we hope the book will do. It will be a beginning. When we analyze the patterns in these 500 cases, the patterns that emerge are absolutely similar to patterns we extract from contemporary databases. And that's where we're tempted to say this is the same phenomenon, it's always been with us.
You assert in the book that alien contact might be mankind's oldest story, that these incidents have always been with us in one form or another, and that they have changed the course of history in some cases. Can you give examples?
Certainly, and it's not just me saying that. I'm just quoting scholars like Professor Culiano at the University of Chicago, who spoke of the travel to the stars as the oldest story of humanity. There was what I love particularly the stories from China, because the people who wrote those records, of course, were the scholars and the poets. Most of there's one from the 13th century, for example, June 3rd, 1277 in China. Strange event seen at dawn. And this was written by Liu Ying, who was a Chinese poet of the Yuan dynasty. And his book was called The Yuan Literature Collection, Event Seen at Dawn. I rise at dawn, and through the window I see a very bright star that crosses the Milky Way. Now I see 3 luminous objects appear in the southern sky, of which 2 fly away and disappear suddenly from my sight. The one which remains possesses 5 unequal lights beneath it. You're beginning to see that this is not an ordinary light in the sky. And above its upper part, I see something in the form of a dome. The unknown object begins to move in zigzag, like a dead leaf. Well, if you remember, we have lots of stories. One of the characteristic motions of modern UFOs is a dead leaf motion. It continues. At the same time, some fiery thing falls from the sky. A short time afterwards, the sun rises, but its brightness is dulled by the luminous object that moves quickly in a northerly direction. So by now, it must have been in the sky for a fairly long time. So this is not just a passing thing in the sky. In the western sky, a green cloud is suddenly disturbed by another unknown object, oval in shape, flat, that descends quickly. This object is more than 3 meters long and is surrounded by flames. It rises again shortly after its descent. In view of this splendid and amazing spectacle, I rush to the village to alert the inhabitants. When my friends come out of their houses, a flying machine has disappeared. After the event, I reflect on it very much, but do not find a reasonable explanation. I have the impression I have come out of a long dream. I hasten to write down all that I have seen at the time so that whoever understands these events can give me an explanation. Well, this is 13th century China, okay? I get letters like this from readers of my books today. Exactly, almost the same words. I have the impression I've come out of a dream. I have no reasonable explanation. Please explain this to me. I wrote it down as I saw it. It's a completely modern description.
As you note in the book, these things are described as omens and portents here and there. They can, in fact, change the course of history in some cases.
They were seen, of course. Anything in the sky at that time was interpreted by people, usually official astrologers and so on. Certainly in the early centuries, as announcing things or being guided by God, by whatever God they were worshiping.
You say that you would like to invite a whole new generation of researchers to become involved in this. Maybe by the end of the program, we can tell anybody in our audience, if they're interested in helping to contribute, how they can contact you or Chris, your co-author, and how, in fact, they can contribute, because it sounds like you need a lot of foot soldiers to get this done.
Yes, and we need people who speak Japanese and Chinese and people who can read ancient Egyptian and so on, but we're very much aware that we're just at the beginning of this.
My guest, Dr. Jacques Vallée, here to talk about his new book called Wonders in the Sky. He looks at UFO cases from antiquity to the advent of the Industrial Revolution. Here's one of them. October 14th, 1253 in England, Nicholas of Findurn reported to Burton Abbey that about an hour of vespers, the sky being clear, suddenly a large bright star appeared out of a black cloud with two smaller stars in the vicinity. A battle royal soon commenced, the small stars charging the great star again and again, so it began to diminish in size, and sparks of fire fell from the combatants. This continued for a considerable time, and at last the spectators, stupefied by fear and wonder, and ignorant of what it might portend, fled. Not exactly a meteor sighting, not exactly a swamp gas, an amazing case from long, long ago, and this book is filled with them. So why hasn't science taken notice, given the robust nature of the phenomenon and the enormous interest it elicits among the public? You'd think that interdisciplinary teams of historians, anthropologists, sociologists, and scientists would rush to study it. And then he notes that Stephen Hawking makes this wisecrack where he says, I'm discounting reports of UFOs. Why would they appear only to cranks and weirdos? Jacques, how do you overcome that? You've been at this for 40 years and plugging away and doing really good work, solid, scientifically grounded work, and yet the mainstream guys still don't come around to this thing.
Well, I've been at it more than 4 years, as you have, George, and Stephen Hawking is somebody I admire enormously. He's one of the great astronomers, one of the great cosmologists of our time. He just hasn't looked at the material, and that's very typical of a lot of the academic community. They have not been exposed to the actual data. And I hope that, eventually, I hope that he and his colleagues will take the time to look at this. I'm encouraged by the fact that now, pilots are coming out and telling their stories, military people, as in the book by Leslie Kean recently, that people are no longer afraid of telling their stories, and you find that they come from people who are not weirdos and cranks. And certainly in this material, in these 500 cases, most of them came from official people, from people who were advisors to kings. In some cases, came from the king and his officers. And I think that it's just a matter of putting that material before people so that they can judge by themselves.
So anybody who looks at it with an open mind can't help but be impressed and be interested.
Well, they would, again, they don't have to buy into any particular theory. We're not smart enough, I think, at this point, to have a theory that really accounts for all of this material. It's very complex. It's very difficult. We don't have all the data. But, for example, there is November 1st, 1461, in France, in Arras. The witness is Jacques Duclair, legal advisor to Philippe III. He writes, quote, "On this day of our Lord, All Saints' Day, there appeared in the sky an object as bright as burning steel, as long and wide as half of the moon. It was stationary for 15 minutes. Well, what was it? I mean, it wasn't a meteor, it wasn't a comet. Suddenly, the strange object began to spiral upwards, and then it spun around and rolled over like a loose watch spring, after which it disappeared in the sky." Now, he publishes this in the memoir of Jacques Duclair about the reign of Philippe le Bon, Duke of Burgundy. And this was published in Brussels in 1836. Okay, so you just have to trace, and this is where Chris and his team were remarkable. They traced back all these cases one by one and did the critical analysis. And by the way, there are lots of stories. You hear people will come to me and say, well, what about India? What about the Vedanta? They talk about the legend of God flying around in machines. What about the Hopi have a tradition of a beautiful maiden coming down from the sky in a basket and so on. Well, that's fine, but those are stories. They have tremendous cultural significance, but I can't do very much with them as a scientist. We made the rule that we would only take cases that had a date and hopefully a time and a place, and in many cases the name of the witness. And most of our cases have all of that. We relaxed the rule in the early centuries, but after the 13th and 14th century, we enforced the rule that we wanted a precise date and a precise place. We're not dealing with legends and cultural traditions and so on. We're dealing with actual recorded facts.
Well, you've got one of the oldest ones, and I was asking you before the break about cases that might have affected human development, human culture. One of the oldest ones you cite on page 29 of your book is in the Nile Valley of Egypt, 1347 B.C., and this involved the Pharaoh Akhenaten, who had his own experience, saw this thing float down. It was described as a shining disc, and you don't see the disc description in throughout the 500 cases that you have here, but this guy actually described it as a disc. He went on to found a new religion based on the worship of what he called the solar disc, and basically established his immortality. That's a big one.
Yes, he founded a new civilization and a new religion, and this is actually recorded again in a stela. And again, in those days, of course, there was no paper, and important events like that were actually engraved in stone, and that's how they have come to us. So that shows, again, how important people felt that it was, and how relevant it was to their history and their society.
How much weight do you give to cases in the Bible that you don't have a specific date, you know approximately when it might have happened, but you know that it's been rewritten over time by different scholars, biblical scholars? The prophet Elijah, for example, you mentioned that he had an experience in 850 B.C. or around there.
Yes, and the most significant, I think, from the events described in the Bible is probably Ezekiel, because Ezekiel is very detailed. There are different interpretations of what he wrote, and of course what we have in the Bible was written centuries after Ezekiel's death, but it was written from the tradition that he left and that crossed the centuries. What he describes is very interesting because he uses words that are used only once in the Bible, and he even uses a word that's used only once in the language of the time. So he was obviously very distraught and very disoriented by what he saw. It's a classic abduction. And by the way, people studying abduction believe that abductions were started recently, and I'm sure you've interviewed some of these authors, that it's a recent phenomenon, and it shows a new phase in the phenomenon. And that's not true. I mean, abductions go back. There are many cases of abductions in our chronology, in our records. Ezekiel was transported to a faraway mountain, and he was in shock. And what he describes were wheels within wheels, and he describes 4 beings that left him completely confounded. I should mention that the book, I think, some of the richness of the book comes from the fact that Chris and I didn't agree on everything, which is always healthy in science. Chris is a much more precise and exacting scholar than I am. And we had discussions, not fights, because I really admire what he does, but we had strong discussions and arguments about some of the cases. I was more willing to include cases where we didn't have all the documentation, all the references, and even cases that didn't actually include an object per se, but some form of contact with a non-human voice or a non-human form. And he insisted that we should only focus on aerial objects as opposed to more vague phenomena, and that we should always have a reference. We compromised, and in the book you'll see a little eye with a circle around it, which means this is a case where we need more information. And it's really an appeal to the reader or to people who have more information to help us. I won some of those arguments because I said, look, we know that there may be a case here. If we don't call it to the attention of people, we'll never know more because people are not going to go back and do the research. So it's our duty to publish it, but with a note of caution that we don't know as much as we wanted to about this particular case. In some cases, we don't have a complete reference. So that's how we compromised. And obviously, in a case like Ezekiel, we have to say that we are not in a position to make a complete statement about it. Many of the other cases, we are in such a position because we have traced it to the actual original record.
Well, your comment about abductions and how far back they go is well taken. Looking through this book, I'm amazed at how far back they go and how widespread they are. There's a case from the year 760 in France where the witnesses see this aerial ship battle, these ships fighting it out in the sky, and 4 of these guys are abducted by aerial beings. And there are other stories in the book about during the Inquisition, the period of the Inquisition, abductions happened, and of course, given the times, people associated the events with witchcraft, and there were some tragic results, figuring anybody who gets abducted and is consorting with people in the sky must be a witch, let's burn them.
Yes, right? Exactly. And in, of course, in the Arab tradition, many of these beings from the sky were called the jinns, or the jinni, or the jinn. And, of course, that tradition is very interesting, also from a cultural and religious point of view.
What do you make of these aerial battles? Because we see that in France, in this case in 760, with the Indian example that you talked about. Ancient India had these giant battles. In England, they had giant battles. What are these people seeing? And, of course, I know you don't want to get into theories because you don't do that in the book, but just speaking as Jacques Vallée and not as the co-author of this thing.
Well, it's very puzzling, and Chris and I have had many discussions back and forth about this. Of course, there are cases even in the U.S. of UFOs engaging in what people describe as dogfights. I remember seeing cases like that in the Blue Book fight. So it may be just a description of erratic movements of objects in the sky that are interpreted as a battle. In other cases, we just don't know what they saw. And I'm sure that the book will be criticized, if not attacked, by historians, and in a legitimate way, saying, look, a sighting in the 7th century in France is not on the same level, on the same playing field as something in the 17th century, in Germany. And we know that. So we've divided the chronology 1 century at a time with an introduction and an epilogue for every century, summarizing what was going on in that particular period, culturally, in terms of communication, well, the invention of paper, for example, the invention of the printing press, the invention of the telegraph, the different modes of communication, patterns of urbanization, and so on. I mean, we are not completely ignorant of those things, and that communication in the 17th century was not what it was, in the Dark Ages. And so we try to place these descriptions in their linguistic and cultural context as much as we can, and obviously put it in a modern language, but in a modern interpretation, but without losing the framework.
I want to mention this case in particular. I guess maybe you owe a debt of gratitude to Saint Agobard in France, 815, because he wrote about Magonia and these abductees from Magonia. And apparently the stories of abductions and things in the sky were so common that sort of an underground theory had developed among the people that there must be a place called Magonia where all these ships come from. And this guy wrote, oh, no, don't believe that. That's crazy. You can't believe in a place called Magonia, right?
Well, Agobard was a remarkable man. He was one of the great scholars of his time, wrote 22 books in Latin. He was the Archbishop of Lyon in the 9th century, played an important political role after the death of Emperor Charlemagne, was exiled for a while and came back to Lyon. The Archbishop of Lyon was almost as powerful as the king. So he carried considerable weight, and he wrote books against superstitions. He was, in a way, he was a rationalist, even though he was an archbishop. And in one of his books called About Thunder and Lightning, he says that the people of his district were so crazy that they thought there was this unknown land above the clouds called Magonia, where these ships were coming from. And that one day the people brought to the church 4 humans in chains, 3 men and 1 woman, who had come down from one of those flying ships. And obviously, as you said, they must be witches because they came from a flying ship. So they wanted to kill them, and he preached to them and said that there couldn't be flying ships, that this was a complete superstition, and that they should let these people go. And so he, in a way, saved their life because he was a non-believer in UFOs. So it shows that skeptics can be useful sometimes.
A lot of these things that appear in the sky, they do take on religious overtones. People think of them as a religious sighting. There are instances mentioned in your book, including one from Italy in the year 1001, where somebody sees these strange lights and then a luminous lady. They figure it's got to be Virgin Mary. That pops up a lot, where things are seen in the sky and they are given religious import, whether or not it fits or not.
Well, one of the secret pleasures, sinful pleasures of working with this material is to look at how people explained it, because there was always some wise guy in the crowd who had an explanation. Usually they would go to, a great scholar or a religious leader, and he would say, well, this thing represents, the Pope, and this other thing represents our bad king, and it shows that, religion will triumph, or it shows that England will be defeated, or it shows that people should pray and renounce their sins. They had all these explanations, just like, the Air Force today, explaining it as, it must be the planet Venus, even though it was seen in the north, or it must be some comet, even though it crossed the sky in 10 minutes, So it's one of the secret pleasures.
It's in a way, it's like the precursor to disinformation. The church had its own version of Phil Klass back in the Middle Ages or something. Oh, yeah, this is God's work here. You better straighten up and tie to the church or something like that, or using these kinds of cases to get the people in line.
Yes, but when you go back to the actual record, you find that it's absolutely similar or parallel to what people are seeing today, which we still can't explain.
Well, that's what I wonder, and I know you maybe don't want to get into that in a discussion with the book itself, but the idea that maybe we are seeing the same things, but they they were seeing the same sort of things, but the appearances took it on a different form. And I know that's entirely speculative in our part, that maybe whatever this is, this entity, this intelligence, it appears to us in different form. Whether you call them wheels or orbs or discs or flying dragons, there are 500 or more cases in this new book, Wonders in the Sky by Jacques Vallée. And it's amazing as you read these cases how often these things seem to appear to what we would call great people, a pharaoh, the Chinese emperor, Alexander the Great, Michelangelo, and even to Jacques Vallée himself. Do you think that is an accident, that these things appear to what we would call great people?
Well, I think it's simply the filter of history. That if it appeared to some peasant somewhere, probably the person would not have been able to read and write in those years, and the ones that come to us because they appeared to a king or to a pharaoh or to a bishop. Were recorded because he was surrounded by scholars and clerks and people who could write. I think those are the ones that have survived and were felt to be important.
I should point out that although you've written a lot of UFO books, you are by no means a UFO believer, not in the classic sense. I mean, you believe there's a legitimate phenomena there, but you have really put it to the mainstream UFO community over the years, suggesting that some of their central theses are flat out wrong. We, as you have said, we don't exactly know what it is, this intelligence, but you were the first to write that probably the vast amount of these incidents and cases belie the theory that the ET explanation is the best explanation, that it just doesn't seem to make sense. In looking at these 500 cases from years gone by, did they affect your views in that regard? Did they alter your views about what it might be?
That is obviously was a frequent topic of discussion between Chris Obeck and me. He has a more detached, I think, view of that. He should speak for himself. But in my interpretation of his position is a little bit more cautious. What I'm criticizing is the first degree, the first level ET explanation. I mean, that these are spacecraft that come from some other planet and they come here to save us or to conquer us or to steal materials from us and so on. I mean, that is the first thing you can think of when you begin to study this material. And the first two books I wrote back in the 60s, in the mid and late 60s, took that approach, and it's always, as I said, we know that there must be life equal or superior to our consciousness, to our intelligence, throughout the universe. It's a big cosmos out there, and I studied astronomy, and I still love astronomy, and now we keep discovering new planets, including planets similar to the Earth. So that only reinforces that view that was controversial in the 60s, but now it's mainstream. It's about time. However, when you look at the patterns, which as a scientist, a theory is only as good as the explanations that it provides for the facts. And when we look at the observations themselves, it doesn't account for what people are reporting. People are not reporting a spacecraft. They're reporting a whole range of phenomena, and there is no simplistic explanation. And if anything, doing this work in the last 6 years on the ancient sightings has sort of nailed that for me, that there is no simple explanation. It's not, chariots of the gods. It's not something like that, as seductive as it could be. However, that doesn't mean that they are not from outer space, or that form of consciousness doesn't have a link beyond the Earth. I mean, if they can do, in the hypothetical they, in quotes, they can do what the witnesses described, that could be from anywhere, anytime. They have obviously mastered gravity, they have mastered time beyond what our science can account for today. Now, I'm a strong believer in science. I think science eventually will understand all this. I could be wrong, but it's not a simple spacecraft where you can just go there and kick the tires. At the center of any theory about UFOs, whether it's a paranormal, parapsychological, Jungian, and so on, you have to account for the fact that there is a machine there. There is a technology, and I've never said otherwise. That's really why I continue to be interested. I mean, I'm very interested in the physics of it. In my current work, I've narrowed down my work to just a few cases that involve traces, involve material, involve electronic communication, things that we begin to make sense of in a somewhat primitive way. But we've collected. There is material that has been recovered after some of the close encounters that we can analyze. We're beginning to find some patterns in the physics. We're beginning to have some ideas about the electromagnetic communication, or at least the electromagnetic phenomena that surround these things. And little by little, we're converging on a pattern, or at least not an understanding yet, but at least a model of what that technology can be. But it's not all there is. There is much more than just technology involved, and that's what you see in. Even these ancient Chinese writers and poets were talking about a machine. They were talking about a contraption of some sort, and there were descriptions of things crashing to the ground. There were descriptions of traces. There are descriptions of medical effects, paralysis, intense heat when the object flew over them, certainly medical effects and certainly psychological effects that are similar to what current witnesses, modern witnesses, are describing to us.
You are familiar, of course, with this ranch in Utah where we've written something about it, and these different phenomena appear to different people at different times. It seems like whatever it is, it decides when it's seen, where it's seen, and who gets to see it, almost as if it's a display, a show. In your writings over the years, you've written that it seems to be, one theory being, that it's almost like a control system, that whatever it is, it keeps us under control in ways by appearing at different times to different people. It in effect, intervenes in the course of human affairs. And you have said that this control system theory that you have is testable. And I'd like to know if you ever tested it. And if not, is that still doable?
Well, I didn't mean necessarily that there was an intelligence, a supreme intelligence controlling it or directing it. The phenomenon has the information characteristics of a control system. It comes in waves. It responds to certain things. I've never published this, but I will someday. As you know, one of the things I want to leave behind is a record of my own research called Forbidden Science, and I've published 2 volumes so far, and they are, sort of not widely published, but they are on record, and I want to continue to do that. In the 90s, I tried to create sort of an artificial thing like the ranch in Utah, and this was, of course, before the events at the ranch. I tried to create a hotspot of information where I was hoping to sort of attract the phenomenon to be able to record it better. And it didn't give the results I was hoping for. It's not something that you can just decide to engage with, or at least I haven't found a way to do it. But it's worth continuing to try because there seems to be a form of consciousness behind it that is extremely subtle, has a great sense of humor, is completely ruthless. I mean, I know from reading your book, what, and actually being there, what happened at that ranch. there is no simplistic explanation.
And not just at the ranch, in general, across the world. I mean, this thing is it toys with people. It messes with their minds, and you always have to wonder what the heck kind of agenda is going on here, if there is even an agenda at all.
Well, I'm not. I studied physics, but I certainly don't consider myself a physicist. I'm trained in information science, and in information science and logic, you often have situations, well, even in mathematics, where you have contradictions in the material you're looking at. And the solution is to go up a level. It's not to fight it and try to force it into a preconceived idea. It's certainly true in mathematics. That's why, imaginary numbers were invented. There are no imaginary numbers. But when you invent the concept, it enables you to do things in mathematics about real things that you couldn't do before. So I think that's probably what we will have to do with this, is go up a level, not be so fascinated by the day-to-day cases and the sightings and the databases, which are, of course, you need to do, but you need to go up and take a wider view of this, and I think that's very much what the direction that Chris is going. Chris is going to write, many more books. He has amazing material in many areas of this, and he'll continue to publish it, I hope. One of the remarkable things in this book is when you get to the 17th and 18th century, you get to the Enlightenment. And then you find that the witnesses are astronomers. Some of the greatest names in science, Arago, Messier, the discoverer of what is now known as galaxies, the Messier objects. Cassini, the director of Paris Observatory. Of course, Arago was director as well. Le Verrier, who discovered Neptune. All of them were involved in this, in looking, actually inviting people to send them observations of unknown objects in the sky. The science was open. It was, of course, in those days, it was great glory for an astronomer to attach his name to a new phenomenon. And scientists were completely open to the idea of this correspondence between astronomers and the mathematician Gauss, for example, about objects that were very puzzling to them. There are descriptions by Lagrange of a series of objects moving through the sky in military fashion and turning together, and those were not just a train of meteors. Cassini made 2 observations of something that seemed to be in orbit near Venus, and he didn't publish. Again, these were careful scientists. He didn't publish it because he was the only one who had seen it. And he only published it when he saw it a second time a few years later. Now, these are careful men who've attached their name to some of the great discoveries of the 18th century, and there you are. I mean, these are the records that we have forgotten. And when you see the academic arrogance that we encounter today of people just not even wanting to look at the records, even the records from pilots or records from the Air Force or from the Navy. They just won't even look at it. They will dismiss it with, out of hand, with ridicule. The science has fallen to a terrible level of arrogance.
And, of course, as you know, these days, the critics, the ultra-skeptics and die-hard debunkers, they like to say that no scientists ever see this stuff. Astronomers never see this stuff. And it looks like we've gone backwards instead of forwards, at least in this regard, from the 8 days of the Enlightenment that you describe in this book.
Yes, absolutely. It's a shame.
And scientists today, it seems like there's a gap between what the religion that they have embraced and the reality of what millions of people around the planet see. Now, of course, as you know, 95% of what people see in the sky is explainable, but that other 5% gets dismissed altogether, and nobody wants to hear about it. Don't even want to look at it.
Well, and that's, I think, culturally very dangerous because people know that. So they, if an educated person sees something in the sky, they don't want to be laughed at by some astronomer who's going to ridicule them or dismiss them, so they don't report it. Or they, hopefully they will report it to someone like me or somebody who's been publishing research on it, or contact some of the UFO groups. But most witnesses today just keep it to themselves.
I do want to say, you mentioned your 2-volume work, Forbidden Science. I had read the first volume some years ago, and then last year, when I saw you, you were kind enough to give me a copy of the second one. And if people want to understand, I know this is not a book for the masses. It's sort of your personal journey of discovery. But if people want to understand how Jacques Vallée came to sort of where he is now and is thinking about these subjects, this is what you need to read. Forbidden Science Volume 2 is just an excellent book. And really, I'm surprised how candid you were about some of your thoughts and sharing your personal life with the readership.
Well, I think it has to be in the context of, the researcher's own path. In a way, this is also, a spiritual journey for me, and I feel, honored to be able to work on this with a small cadre of people, of scientists, and of researchers, of investigators like you, and try to make sense out of it. It's the greatest mystery that has been presented to us. And again, at the center, there is, I don't disagree with Leslie Kean or with Richard Dolan. I mean, he was kind enough to ask me to write a foreword to his first book. I don't disagree with their position that there is a technology there. The question, I think what I'm trying to contribute is the sense that there is no simplistic explanation. We shouldn't just jump to conclusions about this.
You are a skeptic in many regards, and in this book, Wonders in the Sky, you take on a little bit Eric von Daniken, Zecharia Sitchin. I mean, I would imagine at some point, as you're looking at 500 cases from antiquity on up, that you had to cross paths with some of the same cases and incidents and evidence that these guys have interpreted in their own way, right?
Yes, I also crossed paths with Alexander Kazantsev in Russia, who was one of the originators of all of that. There we get to an area where I'm not really competent to speak, cultural anthropology and so on, and the history of religion. Chris and I, the book is in 3 parts, and what we've been talking about is the chronology itself, which is the first part, the largest one. But the second part looks at the cases that we've rejected, which includes a lot of cases that are in the UFO literature and, have to do with chariots of the gods and all those interpretations, many of which we dismiss because, again, it's a simplistic explanation. Of course, the gods can do anything if they could. They could come down here, but again, what the material we have doesn't reflect that kind of thing. It doesn't fit that theory, and a theory is only as good as what it explains. And at some point, you have to take a skeptical, not a cynical, but a skeptical view of it, and really dig into the material and ask. Try to explain it fully. Skeptical
is a good word. It's just been hijacked in our time, Jacques. We're going to take a break. We'll come back with more of our fascinating interview with Jacques Vallée, author of the new book Wonders in the Sky, right after this on Coast to Coast AM. Here on Coast to Coast, we're tangled up with a tangled web of ufology. It's perplexing, it's frustrating, and few people have been at it as long as Jacques Vallée. Few people have dug as deep or have tried to understand it more than Jacques Vallée. But somehow, the same issues, the same questions arise again and again, year after year, decade after decade. And you have to wonder if we will ever have any clear answers. Certainly, if we are going to have it, it's because of the work of people like Jacques. Jacques Vallée, we've covered some of the highlights of your, I guess it's close to 60 years, 50 years that you've been chasing the UFO mystery and trying to figure it out. I wonder if this thought has occurred to you. A few people have been at it as long as you or have done as important work. Whether or not it will be ultimately frustrating for you if you don't have the answers during your time here. If you can't resolve the mystery in your mind. That's got to drive you crazy.
No. Science is never finished. I've had the privilege of working on a new phenomenon, or something that wasn't commonly recognized, and of making a contribution to it, calling it to the attention of people. I think I work every day with physicists and with doctors, with medical people who've been working on, cancer for 60 years, and we still can't cure cancer. We're making progress, and there are new theories and new hopes. The same thing in physics. I mean, we still can't reconcile relativity with quantum mechanics, especially with respect to gravitation. And that, you have to realize that these are difficult problems, and they take time. And we just, you're a worker like any other worker. You're never finished, and hopefully you make your contribution. You bring a little. I've seen during my career, I also had the privilege of working with some of the pioneers of the internet, with people like Paul Barron, who invented packet switching, people like Doug Engelbart, who did the first, arguably the first social network at Stanford Research Institute, where I was in the 70s, and I've told those stories. It's not finished. I mean, we still don't know what the ultimate, we're just at the beginning of the internet and the web. We don't know what form it's going to take, in 20 years. But the pleasure is having brought a few stones to the edifice. We're building something here. There is also, it's also a lot of fun. I think Chris and I were carried forward by, and the whole team, by just these extraordinary discoveries that we were making, including things that turned out to have been invented completely by some spurious author, where we could finally prove that the thing never happened. Things that turned out to be comets that had been quoted in the UFO literature for a long time. It ties to history, it ties to genealogy, it ties to a lot of extraordinary things. So, for example, the first congressional hearings on UFOs took place on December 15, 1813. Some ufologists keep calling for congressional hearings. Well, they happened in 1813. There were lights seen over the shore of Connecticut, and of course there was a war going on between the United States and England, and the colonies in England at those days. And the question was, what were those lights? Was it created by traitors signaling to the English fleet? And there were very intense hearings and arguments in Congress about these unknown lights in the sky. And I think Decatur was involved in those discussions and so on. So you learn a lot about the history and a lot about culture as you go through this.
And amazingly enough, Congress did not resolve the mystery of the unexplained lights back then or in the 60s.
Exactly.
Or now.
They don't seem to be doing a very good job of explaining it.
You have also jumped in head first, and on one level, I guess I should not be surprised, given your inquisitive nature, into another sort of cutting-edge phenomena, and that's remote viewing. We read a couple of years ago that you had done some training yourself, and I wonder I don't know how much you are willing to talk about that, but whether or not it has contributed to your understanding of the UFO phenomena.
Well, that's a whole other discussion, and
I know.
We could go into that at some point.
Okay.
I was at SRI actually before the remote viewing program started, or just at the same time. I was just in one of the computer departments working with Dr. Engelbart, who had invented the mouse. He had already invented all of that, so I can take no credit for it, but we worked together on the early days of the ARPANET. SRI had machine number 2 on the ARPANET. I don't need to tell you how many millions of machines there are today on the Internet. And so those were exciting days, and the remote viewing project was just a few offices away. And many of the, quote, psychics, for lack of a better term, had seen UFOs. So I became sort of a friend of the court or an advisor to the program, even though at the time I was not cleared for the program, but I had many contacts with the psychics involved. I was cleared later in the 80s, but when I was at SRI, when Ingo Swann arrived, I had many discussions at lunch with Ingo, and was absolutely fascinated with the things that he was doing and demonstrating. And we talked about, I talked to him in terms of information patterns, because I deal with information. And in what it seemed to me that what he was doing was addressing information, except it was information that wasn't there, that was on the other side of the world, and transferring his consciousness in some mysterious way to those places. So I took him through a quick briefing or a course in information addressing from a computer point of view, and that's how the idea of coordinate remote viewing started. I didn't talk about it for a long time because when I was cleared for Grill Flame in the 80s, of course this was a secret project, and I think I'm the only one who hasn't written a book about it. And by now, all of that, or practically all of it, has been declassified. So Ingo asked me to give a talk in Las Vegas a couple of years ago about those days, about the early days of the program, and I did. I think it's all over the internet now. So I have no problem talking about it.
Did you ever use remote viewing, and as so many remote viewers have done, encounter some kind of intelligence or see a UFO while you're in that state? I
have not. I have experienced, I was trained by Ingo. I'm not a very good remote viewer, but I'm good enough to understand what it is and what you feel and what it does. I remember a case where I was given a set of coordinates and instantly I had vertigo, and I was on top of a peak somewhere with a precipice all around me. It turned out to be the top of a very, very high mountain, and that came immediately, and I'll always remember that. And I had a number of experiences of that type. I think if I have any talent, it's not remote viewing. It's probably in some other area.
Let's, well, you know what? We'll have to have you back for an entire show about that. I'll twist your arm with that. Let's talk about some current developments in ufology that seem to pop up year after year. I want to get your take on them. You and I had the pleasure of meeting and interviewing Phil Corso back in the 1990s. We talked to him here in Las Vegas and also saw him in Florida. And he, of course, he's a credible guy, an interesting guy who told an incredible story about recovered technology being salted out into private industry. What is your take, not necessarily just on Corso, but on the whole crash retrieval stuff that our government has pieces of flying saucers somewhere?
Yeah, well.
Do we not have enough time for that? I mean, in general,
I can give you a quick answer. I don't want to evade the question as much as I'd like to. But I was enormously impressed by Phil Corso. I tend to be enormously impressed by anything who saved Europe from fascism. And there is no question he was a brave soldier. Made it clear to us that he was a soldier, not a physicist. So he did not know really what these things were. Colonel Alexander, and he's publishing a book in a couple of months that includes a very, very detailed intelligent analysis of the Corso statement. So I would really defer to Colonel Alexander for that.
Okay.
Because he went through his military history, where he had been, why he said some of the things he said, and so on. My impression was that Phil Corso was telling us the truth as he believed it.
Well, let me ask it in a more generic sense. Do you believe that our military, our government, has pieces of a flying saucer that's from somewhere else?
Well, Corso said a couple of things that are impossible. For example, about transistors. Well, I work every day with people. I mean, the invention of the transistor is within human memory. I work with people like Dr. Federico Fagin, for example, who is, right here in Silicon Valley and was the inventor of the microcomputer, the integrated circuit. I mean, all of that, we know the people who did it. Many of them are still alive. They didn't get it from Roswell. You can trace that technology through all its extraordinary technology. It happened very fast, but physically it made sense. I mean, every step is understood. And we have their laboratory notebooks. We know how they made the discoveries, where every experiment went, and so on. And we're still, of course, developing that technology. So the idea that came from Roswell makes absolutely no sense. The thing about fiber optic, well, it was known for a long time, even the 30s and before, that a wire of glass carries light. And in fact, it was used in art and it was used in instrumentation by glassmakers a long time before people thought about using it for fiber optic communication. So those things make no sense. I mean, the transistor was first described in the field effect was first described in a German patent in 1934. So there is a continuity there in human memory and human technology. That's just development of technology. What intrigued me the most about Phil Corso was his encounter with an entity in the desert. And that was something he did not understand, that made a profound impression in his life, and it's not in his book, because the people who actually edited his book thought that was a little bit too strange, and they wanted to stay within the dogma of, crashed material and that kind of thing. The government, well, I don't know how, and there are people who do a good job of filing FOIA requests and digging into what the government must have known and so on, and about Roswell and other things. And I wish them well, and I'm glad that they have the
tenacity,
the courage and to do this. That's not something where I can contribute very much. I like to talk to, but this is a phenomenon that's all around us. You can talk to farmers who've seen the thing close by on their field, and I can go talk to them, and that's what I like doing. And many of them want to be anonymous because they don't want to talk to the media, they don't want to talk to the Air Force, they don't want the government involved, but they'll talk to people like me and to researchers. And so we have access to the phenomenon, even to pieces of metal that are found after some of these, and we can analyze them and so on. So I like this quiet Silicon Valley approach where you just do that work in stealth mode with your own resources. And I don't have the resources to do what should be done, which would be a larger scale study. So I concentrate on the things that I can do, which is looking at technology. Now, the government must have tons of records. We know that because we talk to pilots who say, when I landed, there were two guys there in blue jeans, and they confiscated all my material, and they took it somewhere, and they told me not to talk about it. So this must go somewhere. Now, it's not necessarily the CIA or the Air Force. We don't know where these guys in blue jeans come from. They violate many of the rules of handling of classified information. So who is it that can do that? I don't have the answer to that. I'm not so sure that it's a government agency, although we know, of course, that government agencies have accumulated stuff simply because they have sensors everywhere that are triggered by the phenomenon. So, of course, those people have classified clearances, and they can't talk to the guy in the next cubicle. So that's not the kind of research I can do. I'm not so hopeful that we can. I mean, obviously, the thing to do, and I've said that time and again. The this stuff should be turned over to science. And let science compete, let different labs and different teams come up with their best idea to do research on this in a competitive basis. I mean, that's the way the Internet was built. That's the way we do research on everything else. I mean, what are they afraid of? What are they afraid of?
I guess ultimately they're not, and that's, I wanted to ask you one more question, your view on disclosure, because Rich Dolan and Bryce Zabel will be here in the next, at the top of the hour to talk about after disclosure, AD. You believe that there is some sort of a storehouse of information, perhaps in government hands, perhaps in private hands, that could be disclosed. Do you think it's going to happen? I mean, is there any impetus, anything that could force it?
When people talk about disclosure, they don't talk about my disclosure.
Right.
The question is, well, disclosure of what?
Yeah.
These are usually, the mainstream ufology today believes that the government has a proof of contact with extraterrestrials, including perhaps bodies or maybe live extraterrestrials. Well, how do they know that? You have testimony from credible people who say that there is something like that. So, yeah, let's track it down. But the disclosure that I'd like would simply be turn the data that, strip it of any classified information. If it was a classified radar somewhere, I don't need to know how the radar works. But give us the data. Give us, just the facts, ma'am, and let science work on it. I don't think it's going to be very simple. It may take a couple of generations of scientists, but at least we will know. I mean, the public is not going to panic. In a case like this, it's the elites that panic because they're afraid of losing power. But the public, your audience, the people listening to us now, they can take it. I mean, they thought about this. Many of them probably have seen things themselves. They know there's something there. There is more than what we see every day, around us. It's a big universe. So why are they so afraid?
Jacques Vallée, it's been wonderful to have you here. I sure hope that you will grace us with your presence again sometime, and wish you the best of luck. I encourage people to buy this book, Wonders in the Sky, and congratulate you and Chris Aubeck on writing it. I will do that. Thank you very much, Jacques.
Thanks,
appreciate it. The last time Phil Imbrogno was here, it was to discuss his book, Files from the Edge, A Paranormal Investigator's Explorations.
Ultraterrestrial Contacts is my latest book. It just came out in December.
What struck me the most, though, is the personal part of it, that you've had experiences that I think you've never talked about, at least I'm not aware of them, personal experiences, not only with case studies and incidents, sightings and things of that sort, but MIB-type, Men in Black-type encounters, hassles from the government that I had never heard before.
Yeah, well, you have a tendency to want to keep that quiet. I used to work with, Dr. J. Allen Hynek, and he used to tell me, you have to research it from a distance. Don't become part of it. And he had experiences also, of course. He stayed very conservative that he never talked about, except, with some very few private people. The point is that if you've been involved with this stuff for so long, and it's real, sooner or later it's going to cross your life. You're going to be involved in it some way. You're going to experience something. And I think that's true right across the board.
You start off in the book talking about how, like most UFO researchers, at least old school guys, people like Hynek and other colleagues of yours, that you shied away from getting into discussions about beings and abductees and encounters with aliens, probably because it just sounded kind of wacky, and you stuck to just looking at flying saucers, sighting reports, things of that sort.
Oh, yeah. Back in the early days, back in the 70s, going into the early 80s, you hear about those reports back then, and the thing is that people were seeing something. I mean, back in the 70s, I've investigated a lot of cases of people just seeing vague lights in the sky and people having, some close encounters, some good stuff. And then all of a sudden you get these reports, these people call you who claim that they've been abducted by aliens, they've had a contact experience of some sort. I mean, what do you do when you hear this? I mean, you're really not prepared for it, especially back in those days. I mean, so you kind of had a tendency to shy away from it because it didn't seem very scientific. And as Dr. Hynek used to tell me, and he said, well, when we were investigating UFO reports together, he said to me, many of these cases were coming forward to us, and he would just, be on the phone and raise his eyebrows. And I said, well, don't you think that this stuff should be investigated? And he said, no. He said it shouldn't be because it's not the realm of the physical scientist. And I said, but it's all part of the phenomena. And he says, he says, at this point we're trying to make UFOs respectable, to accept the idea for people to believe that there's something out there that needs to be studied that can't be explained by conventional science. He said, but if you take these cases and you bring them to, the attention of the media, he said the media will have a field day with it. Now, this is a time you have to remember that when people were still going on TV claiming trips to Venus and having sex with aliens and so on and so on, it was like a circus. But we see less of that today, with many people who've had experiences who do not want publicity, that had these experiences that totally changed their life. And the thing you have to ask yourself is how much of it is real, how much of it is imaginary, and take it from there. So it's not the realm of the physical scientist. UFO investigation involves many disciplines right across the board because the abduction phenomena, the contact phenomena, is all part of this mystery.
You, of course, the title, Ultraterrestrial Contact, and in the book you discuss all manner of different kinds of creatures, a whole litany of extraterrestrials, angels, demons, jinn, spirits, ghosts. Are all these manifestations of the same thing? And explain to me, maybe we'll begin with a definition of terms, what ultraterrestrial means.
Well, ultraterrestrial refers to something other than extraterrestrials. If we talk about extraterrestrials, I mean, that's a broad term also. But it usually means, for most people who are involved with UFO research or exobiology or something, creatures, aliens from another planet, from another technology, physical beings, and so on and so on. Now, ultraterrestrials is a very broad word, and it refers to anything outside of really our physical reality. So we're dealing with probably contacts, that are something more exotic than aliens and spaceships from another world.
But what is it? What is that? Is it somebody that's been here for a long time, longer than us, that can see us and we can't see them?
Well, I believe so. I believe that, the universe is indeed multidimensional, and that there are parallel realities in which other beings exist, and that these beings have interacted with the human race from time to time. And one of the things that puzzled me during my research is that I found out that many of these contact experiences are different. It almost seems as if the contact is initiated. I'm not talking about your typical abduction by the Greys and so on, although that may be part of it. The entity or whatever it is doing contact seems to take a form at first that's pleasing to the individual. This is not always the case, but and it's puzzling to talk to many different people and get different descriptions. But if you consider that perhaps there is something out there that may want to hide itself, and it may manifest in many different forms in order to keep its true identity secret. And this may be the case. So when you look at the contactee-contact situation with each individual case and compare a number of cases together, it really doesn't make sense. It just looks like there's some type of psychoses of the 21st century. But if you take the broad spectrum of cases, a large number of cases, and put them together, I mean, they're almost all very similar. And contact experiences, by the way, are interpreted mostly by the individual experiencing them. The contacting entity gives very little information, and the person interprets the visitation or the contact according to, number one, their education, their religious beliefs, their cultural beliefs, their upbringing, the way they were brought up, and their general philosophy on life. And most people will try to do this to try to deal with these cases. They have these experiences, and they try to deal with them personally for themselves so that they can better understand it. Human beings like to put everything in nice little categories and so they can understand things better. So this is what's going on, and my research has taken me into that area.
Well, you've sort of put things into a category. You're calling them ultraterrestrial. It's a lot of different phenomena. I just went down the laundry list. Are they, in fact, in your mind, the same thing? Are they just showing themselves in different different forms?
I believe that's the case with a certain percentage of the cases. And, of course, I don't have all the answers, and I don't think anybody really does. But the UFO contactee situation may be, in fact, ultra-terrestrial contacts, which I believe are dimensional beings in nature. There may be extraterrestrials in there. You see, we cannot get one particular complex phenomena and put one particular label on it and say, well, this is what's causing all of this. But there may be multiple causes from many different types of origins. And I think many investigators into the paranormal have a tendency to lock into one particular idea and say, this is it, folks. There's nothing else. I don't really believe that. And the word ultra-terrestrial really involves a wide variety of entities, I believe, or experiences in the contact phenomena.
And like as Jacques Vallée has written, that this has always been with us in different guises.
Absolutely. We're talking about, John Keel, we're talking about Vallée, we're talking about even Hynek in his later years decided that, alien spaceships cannot explain the entire UFO experience, as he called it. But, in my work, I'm trying to combine the idea of string theory and quantum physics into the idea of the paranormal. But when you put all that into the equation and your numbers come up with, your equations come up with these ideas of parallel universes and other dimensions, we can accept the paranormal as being more real because there's these other realities that exist around us that we can't see. And what we're calling the paranormal today is something of these other realities that we're only getting a glimpse of.
For you, this started with the Hudson Valley sightings. Standard, if spectacular, series of UFO sightings in a part of New York, an area, by the way, that, as you note in the book, has a long, long history of really weird stuff going on. Let's start with the history of that area, and then tell me how your interest in the Hudson Valley sightings evolves into much stranger territory.
Oh, sure. The Hudson Valley of New York has always been a very mysterious place. I mean, it's the birthplace of the Headless Horseman. We're talking about most of New England has always been very strange. So there's a lot of legends of earth spirits, Indian lights, strange creatures from another dimension. The first contact experience, I think, in North America by Europeans was made by Henry Hudson in 1609 around Catskill, New York, when he encountered these gnome-like beings up in the hills. Now, Washington Irving heard this story, and it inspired him to write Rip Van Winkle. And so you have all of this strange connections here between, our world and another world. And so, when the UFO sightings broke out in the Hudson Valley in 1983, I was totally unprepared to deal with something like that. And usually, you have one or two witnesses, and they saw strange lights in the sky. What did they see? Oh, my gosh, who knows? Then all of a sudden, it's not just a few witnesses. We're talking about thousands of witnesses. And the number is very conservative when I say thousands who saw this enormous object passing over the major highways so low with no sound, stopping traffic, cars pulling off the sides of the roads, and people getting out watching this enormous object float over. Now, you had a wide variety of witnesses. People who would not ordinarily mistake something conventional for a UFO, something that they would not misidentify. So when I got into the investigation of this, I was, usually, when people see UFOs over a very large area, there's a logical explanation. But in this case, looking for logical explanations did not work. And this is where, Dr. Hynek came out here, investigated, talked to quite a few people, and he was convinced. And he said one thing. He said, okay, this thing is so large. It was reported to be the size of an aircraft carrier, a football field. It blocked out the entire sky. It was seen at night. He said, but where do you put it in the daytime? Well, there were many reports that we were getting that the object would just disappear in the sky and reappear in another part of the sky. As one witness, a meteorologist, said, it came over his head and he saw this dark silhouette that blocked out the stars. And then all of a sudden he's looking at it, there's no sound, and poof, he says it's gone. He could see the stars. 5 seconds later, it reappears about 20 degrees to his left, and it comes back on with different color lights, and it's blocking out the sky again. We had many reports from people on the ground, people who were in air traffic control, people who were in aviation, people who were scientists, police officers, and so on, who reported this over and over again. So this introduced an idea of high strangeness into these reports.
I want to go back. Hate to digress, but before we gloss over this, you mentioned very briefly Henry Hudson. That was one of the most amazing things in the book that I read because I was unaware of it. Tell that story about what Hudson's encounter was like.
Oh yeah, it's a fascinating story, and it's in the local folklore there. Well, in 1609, Henry Hudson was going up to the river that bears his name, looking for a passage to into China, and of course he went all the way up the Hudson River and didn't find it, and decided to turn around. As he came down, he stopped at a number of stops to get supplies and stuff, and some of the Native Americans were very friendly to him. And the medicine men said, well, you're going to park in your ship at night, but this is a time, he said, when the spirits are in the mountain, the little men are in the mountain. You do not go into the mountains if you hear a sound. And he's going, big deal. So they continue with their journey down the Hudson to make it back out into, which is New York Harbor right now. And they stop at Catskill, New York for the night because they weren't really sure the river and sailing at it at night. So they stopped for the night, I think, with historians think what is Catskill, New York right now. About after midnight, they start hearing music coming from the mountaintops, and they're seeing flashes of light. And Henry Hudson takes 10 of his men and decides to go and investigate. And as they're climbing up the top of the hill, the mountain, the music's getting louder. They reach the summit of the mountain, and they're shocked to see these little guys, gnomes, if you ever want to call them. And they're dancing around a fire, and they're playing nine-pin. They're playing a game. and he goes over, and they look at him, and they wave him in. They say, "Come on over, buddy," And Henry Hudson sits with the leader of this group, and he tells them that they're from somewhere else. And every 20 years, they come into our world, and they love it here so much because everything's like so physical and everything, and they have a party all night. So Hudson is getting all of these secrets of the universe that he really didn't reveal because he never, he died and he was overthrown. It was a mutiny, and his men are, partying with these little guys, and I mean it's a fantastic time. The fires are going right up into the sky, and bolts of lightning are shooting out, and the whole area's got this strange glow and everything. All this dimensional stuff and contactee stuff that we would think about today.
Phil Imbrogno, I'm going to ask you to stop there. We'll continue the conversation after the break, but I would tease it this way, is that you heard this music. You relate the story that you had an experience with the same kinds of sounds, at least. My guest is Philip Imbrogno, author of the new book, Ultraterrestrial Contact. I want to continue the conversation, the story about Henry Hudson and these bowling gnomes. Wasn't there some Washington Irving bowling scenario? I'm trying to remember. What the heck was it?
In Rip Van Winkle.
Rip Van Winkle, right.
Yeah, the legend says you could hear, when you're here in this world, you can hear the thunder coming from the mountains and the flashes of lightning. And that's the gnomes, these beings up there, playing nine-pin. But Henry Hudson, he's around by the fire talking to the head of the gnomes, and he's looking for his men now through this fire, and he realizes that he doesn't see his men, and that he walks over and he's shocked that they've transformed into these, gnome-like creatures. And he said, what did you do to my men? What happened to them? And the leader says, "Oh, don't worry, when you leave in the morning after they sleep it off, they'll turn back to their old selves, even though I don't know why you would want to be humans. We're actually better." So, and the leader said, "Well, let me tell you," said, "we like you. Can you come back and join us 20 years from now?" And Henry Hudson made the promise that he would try to come back and find out more about them 20 years from now, because after the night they would disappear back into their world and they wouldn't come back for another 20 years. And so Henry Hudson climbs down the mountain with his men who are, drunk, and they're all these little gnome guys now. He goes into the ship, and they sleep very late, and they wake up, and they're back to their normal self. And so Henry Hudson leaves, and, he tells a story a few places, and the story carries on. Henry Hudson dies, and the legend is that every 20 years, in order to keep that promise, the spirits of Henry Hudson and his crew go back to the mountain to meet these entities, these beings, these gnomes, and play nine-pin and have a party all night. Now, the interesting thing, going into the Dutch settlement time, the story continues, where people were hunting, encountering these gnomes every 20 years, seeing the flashes of lightning coming from the mountain, and hearing the music of the gnomes every 20 years. Now, this extended into the 1700s, the 1800s, and so on and so on. Now, when Washington Irving studied the folklore of the area, this story became so intriguing to him that he wrote Rip Van Winkle, about, a fellow who was, just going out into the mountains, and he encounters the gnome playing nine-pin, and he falls asleep for 20 years. And where did Rip Van Winkle go for 20 years? Well, Washington Irving said he fell asleep. But the overall story is that, Rip Van Winkle disappeared from our world for 20 years. Now, was Rip Van Winkle a story? Of course it was. But there are people in Catskill, New York, who claim that they were descendants of a real person who did disappear after he went up into the mountains and exploring the fact that they heard this lightning and this thunder coming from the mountain, and this fellow went up there and never came back. And Washington Irving based that story of Rip Van Winkle on that particular story. Also, you have to remember that Washington Irving, he wrote the story, the Legend of Sleepy Hollow, based on a real legend there. And so he took these stories and, of course, he made them into fiction, but both of them are based, historians think, on real incidents. And we know, for example, the Headless Horseman, there really is a legend there.
Well, where is the Henry Hudson story? Is it recorded in a journal? I mean, how did you come across all this detail?
Well, if you read the Rip Van Winkle story, it talks about the ghost of Henry Hudson and the crew of Henry Hudson coming across there, encountering these beings. And the legend of Henry Hudson is quite well known in the historical aspects. It's supposed to be a legend, but, it was a story that was told over and over again by, his crew to his descendants and so on, and it was told in the area. So, it was carried to the United States, but it's part of the historical records of that part of New York in Catskill. You go to historical societies, you'll find all of these old legends of all these strange happenings. And the story of Henry Hudson is one of them. It's called Legends of the Hudson Valley. And in the Historical Society in Catskill, they have a lot of these, including the Rip Van Winkle story and people who claim to be descendants of Rip Van Winkle. And that many people today, some of the old-timers, believe that the gnomes do come into this world every 20 years. Matter of fact, the last time they were supposed to be here was in 2009, where people once again, reported seeing flashes of lightning and seeing strange lights above the mountains and so on and so on. And today, of course, we call them UFOs. But people have encountered a lot of strange things in those hills, and the Hudson Valley is a hotbed for paranormal.
The tease that I had before the break, I seem to remember, I read the book, but I can't find it at the exact page. But did you hear some sound like that, some music and drums? And
not there. Somewhere else, a place called Ninnim Mountain, which is on the east side of the Hudson, what is supposed to be haunted by, Native American spirits. And, of course, when I was getting into the idea of exploring the contact phenomena, I couldn't exclude anything. So I went out to all of these places and personally investigated a lot of this stuff and spent quite a bit of time in the area. And, of course, I want to say to people that, most of the time, you look at these reality TV shows, but most of your time as a paranormal investigator is spent in the local archives, the local libraries, the local historical societies, searching through documents and letters and stuff like that. So, you have to do a considerable amount of background research before you get into the area. And then, of course, you have to start talking to people and finding people who are holders of some of the old folklore and old legends and so on. But the place where I heard Indian drums was in a place called Ninnim Mountain in Putnam County, New York. And I wasn't alone. Well, the first time I heard it, I was with two other people, and we couldn't believe it, and saying, what the heck is that noise? It's, Indian drums. We're on top of a mountain we're far from anywhere. And yet it was quite loud and coming from all over the place. Now, a couple of years ago in the summer, I was up there with a film crew with Rosemary Guiley. And all of a sudden, while we're filming next to the stone chambers that are there also, about the paranormal happenings on Ninnim Mountain, the mysteries of Ninnim Mountain, the music starts again, the drums. And everybody heard it, and we're going, my gosh, what the heck is this? And I believe that the sound crew was able to record it on their equipment. And so where it came from, how it was produced, I have no idea, but we couldn't find a source for it. And I think it was a little coincidental that we're up there talking about the mysteries of the mountain and the fact that Native American shaman, medicine men, ghosts have been seen going up and down the trails. And on top of the mountain, the Native Americans talk about, the Wappinger talk about the spirits of the mountain, globes of light that circle the area and take human form and will contact people and give them knowledge and so on and so on. Long, complex story. But the thing is that today, if you go into that area in the town of Kent Cliffs, Lake Carmel, and so on, the little towns that surround this particular haunted mountain, if you want to call it that, you say, well, have you ever seen anything strange? And look, nothing strange ever happens up there, except those, lights that appear from time to time on top of the mountain. I'm saying, don't you think that's strange? No, it's not strange. My grandfather's been seeing them. His grandfather saw them. It becomes part of the local happenings, and people don't regard it as that strange anymore. But
Philip, let me ask you this. There's an underlying theme through a lot of this, what you've just mentioned, and throughout the book, and in research that I've done and other people have done, a Native American connection, to things like Bigfoot and spirits and even interdimensional stuff coming in from other worlds. Have you been able to figure out what the connection is? It seems like everywhere you look for one of these mysteries, Native Americans pop up at some level.
Yes, you have to remember that the Native Americans in most of the tribes, especially in the Northeast, actually believed there was another world very close to ours, and this was a world of spirit, and it was possible for us to go into these areas. And sometimes they marked these areas with stones, prayer stones, and so on and so on. Or they did carvings and put totems in these particular areas. And they claimed that these areas were actually gateways to another world. But the creature that comes out of there that protects that area is the trickster. And he can take on many different forms and, fool people and even cause people quite a bit of trouble. Powerful enough to even fool the most powerful shamans in the tribe. And I'll tell you, a lot of these areas in the Northeast, and I can't speak for the rest of the country because my concentration of research has been in the Northeast, many of these areas that I've researched were once Native American sacred ground, and you can find, standing stones and so on, marking an area where they believed was a portal to another world, to the spirit world, a place where spirits come into our world. And the legends are amazing that today these are areas where we're seeing quite a bit of paranormal phenomena and UFO activity. There's got to be a connection.
We had David Jacobs on for the first 2 hours of the program. I'm not sure if you were able to hear it or not, but I know you're familiar with his work. The abduction scenario that he describes, that Bud Hopkins describes as being very widespread and very dark. The connections to genetic experiments, possible hybridization. What's your take on all of that?
I don't really know exactly what's going on there because many of these experiences are like in a dream state. And I don't discount that there are aliens, let's say from Zeta Reticuli or something like that. in contact with the United States government and abducting people and so on. I don't discount that, but I don't think it's responsible for the entire contact phenomena. I think it's part of it. And I talked to a number of people who had classic abductions with the gray beings and being put on tables and having devices moved over them and having tissue samples taken out. Entities walking into a person's room at night, these little gray guys, and going around the bed, and absolutely, the person's in sleep paralysis or paralysis, they're not sleeping. So, I don't discount it, but I think, Hopkins and Jacobs should also look a little further, that maybe something else is going on also that's beyond what the person's seeing and reporting.
Meaning what? That something else lives here and interacts with us on multiple levels and always has?
Yeah, we have to consider that the UFOs may not be from outer space. They may be from a close-by home. They may be entities from our neighboring dimension. They may be our neighbors in time and space, and that they may take on many different forms. The little gray aliens may be one form they take. I don't know for sure, but I think it's something we have to consider, that we can't be locked into one particular idea as to what's causing the contact phenomena, which is escalating, by the way, considerably. I've never seen anything like this. I get dozens of emails a week from people all over claiming that they've had contact or been abducted in contact in some way. And many of these people have never even had a UFO sighting. These entities enter their bedroom at night by walking through the walls and just take them or experiment with them. And it's a wide range of creatures.
And could it be, you mentioned the trickster earlier. We don't really know what these things are or what they really look like, that they take different forms. Maybe they're all the same. Maybe they are different kinds of beings. The fact is that nobody knows for sure.
Nobody really knows for sure, because how could we? We're physical beings locked in a physical universe. And we only see a very small part of this manifestation. It only appears to us as it wants us to appear, as we want to see it. So we're sort of like, blind people trying to feel something and determine what this animal or creature is by just touching it. And it's very difficult to get a complete picture of what we're dealing with. And most people would think that, especially people in some of the major UFO groups, this is not scientific. We have to keep it scientific. Well, how could you keep it scientific? Science really has nothing to do with paranormal phenomena. Science is based on the scientific method of discovery and experimentation. The scientific method was devised for studying things in the physical universe. So when we're dealing with something outside of the physical universe, like paranormal phenomena, UFOs, abductions, and so on, we're dealing with something outside of the physical universe, so the scientific method breaks down. As a scientist myself and a paranormal investigator, UFO investigator, new methods of investigation and techniques have to be devised in order to study this phenomena. If we don't, we're just going to keep on going around in circles for another 40 years.
Because repeatability is pretty tough in this field.
Well, that's true. But I think it's very, very possible to document a lot of this material using the technology that's available, but just modifying the technology that's available. And we can actually get more than just a little glimpse of this other reality that lies beyond our senses.
At least start on this topic, and that is your encounters with government folks. That's back down to earth, something that I, as a reporter, can dig into. It starts with you looking into UFOs over a nuclear reactor in New York, and suddenly you start getting some nasty phone calls.
Oh, yeah. That was something. I'll tell you, that involves the Hudson Valley case, and one of the incidents that took place was a sighting over the Indian Point nuclear reactor in Buchanan, New York. It's called Indian Point. And it was like, when I heard about it, I was contacted by some of the security people there. And this was the government plant. This was not the civilian plant that was affected. And the people who worked there at the government nuclear reactor, reactor number 3, which was the only one in operation at that time, said an object that was enormous in size, triangular in shape, came over reactor number 3, and hovered over there for 15 minutes.
Philip, I'm sorry to have asked you that question without giving you enough time to finish it, but we'll do that after the break, because not only did you hear some strange stories, but suddenly you start getting threatening phone calls from legal authorities. All right, Philip, you hear this story about a UFO hovering for 15 minutes over a nuclear reactor. The guys who work inside are giving you information, and suddenly the heat gets put on you. Tell me that part of the story.
Well, after getting the information and secretly meeting with the police officers, and getting six of them getting their stories, it was utterly fantastic. And you see, they wanted to get me onto the plant to show me where the sighting was. And unfortunately, they had to get their supervisor's permission, and that started a chain of events that caused me quite a bit of problems back in, it was 1984. And I started getting letters and phone calls from the governor's office in New York, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, the Attorney General's office in New York, and stating that I had been told things that violated the security of an important reactor complex. And Indian Point number 3 not only supplies electricity for the New York City subways, but it also supplies power to a number of secret military bases and NSA bases up in New York. And the thing is that, they had that sighting there. It violated the security. So now, of course, this is before Night Siege was published. And they even called my school. And the head of the school called me into his office and said, I want you to listen. He put the person on hold. And they said that they were investigating me as a security threat, and that they were trying to, put pressure on my place of employment to get me to stop publishing or not to publish any information about the sightings at the reactor. And of course, the head of the school said, are there any criminal charges against them? They said, no, not yet. So over the next couple of months, I went to a number of hearings. And finally, it was all dropped. And at that time, the late John Fuller was still with us, and he had quite a bit of experience with dealing with things like this. And John was a very good friend of mine, and he said, don't let them intimidate you. They're just trying to intimidate you to keep you quiet. But the bottom line is that yes, I did have pressure put on me, and it was a very, very hard time. And there were talks about, I violated, national security, and that, of course, they could take it from there and prosecute me as much as they wanted to.
Wow, you're a private citizen who has obtained this information legally. That's incredible. Have they not heard of prior restraint?
Well, the thing that they dropped it after a while. And but it did cause me quite a bit of problems. And was there a coincidence that after that I got audited by the IRS 2 times in a row? Oops. And I had all of these other problems with renewing my driver's license and passports and things like that. I mean, there was no coincidence. Somebody was putting pressure on me. But the thing is that I was also in a conversation with, I was also giving the information to a person who, by the name of Jerry Culleton, who was a newsman at WVIP in Mount Kisco at that time. And he was like a go-getter. He went after the plant. He called up the plant and talked to Carl Patrick at the time, who was the plant spokesman and representative to the media. And he asked him, did you have a UFO sighting or not? Of course, they couldn't discount it because people had seen the UFO over the reactor plant around Peekskill, New York, when they had the sightings. And Patrick says, yes, there was a sighting, but in no way was the reactor or the plant compromised. And Jerry Culleton said, I want to know, did you fire upon this object? And he said, and it's quoted in the newspaper, in the Reporter Dispatch, and the Journal News, which is 2 major papers in Westchester County, I will not confirm or deny if our security people fired upon this object, but they did what was necessary to protect the plant. And once that made it into the papers, that story, did aliens buzz Indian Point, was the headline story. The pressure sort of like dropped off on me. And but there was a time, for several months where I was afraid to even answer the phone. I was afraid to, go to the mailbox to see what the heck was coming next. Obviously, I was getting harassed to keep quiet. Now, the thing is this. I'm hearing stories over and over and over again for many, many years about certain UFO investigators and researchers who uncovered important government documents that are appearing all over the Internet and so on. Oh, they got secret information from the government and so on and so on. I kind of doubt that because I just touched on an area of national security involving UFOs, and I got my ears pinned back really fast.
So it's like your supposition would be those who claim to get the inside info, maybe they really are getting it, but it's stuff that the powers that be want out in the first place.
Well, I don't know what it is, whether or not if it's stuff that they just want out or if it's just, falsified stuff or it's just people saying that they have information. I mean, we hear stories about people who were once involved with the government coming forward with, all of this incredible information, then it just dies out in the media. I don't know. From what I went through, I think if someone really had something important that would make a difference and that the United States government or any aspect of it did not want out there, it would not be out there. Because once again, I mean, when I started to release this information, I mean, I was put down pretty fast. I mean, there was no hesitation.
I want to touch on one other thing before we go to the phones, and that's one of the most interesting chapters in the book, Ultraterrestrial Contact, deals with a guy named Tim. I don't know if that's his real name or not, but he receives information, I guess, through channeling. And I don't know how much stock you put in channel information. I've always been a little bit dubious about it. This guy, Tim, and I'll just give you my honest impressions. He starts getting a lot of information talking about things like crop circles, and then he has information about December 21st, 2012, end of this cycle for the planet on a physical and galactic plane. Sounds like he's regurgitating stuff that you would read on the Internet, a lot of it.
Well, that's true. I included his report in the book because it's a cross-example of the contact phenomena. And, I talked to him a number of times, and this person's dead. He believes this is the truth according to the truth as he understands it. This is not a person who's fabricating. This is a person who really believes that this stuff is happening to them. Do I believe it's really happening to him? I don't really know for sure. I mean, it sounds fantastic. I think many of these contacts people have some type of an initial contact, and then they try to deal with it, and it becomes maybe part fantasy, part reality. But I really don't hold any stock in a lot of the channeling myself, and I actually went around discounting a lot of channelers. But I have found some people who claim to be channeling information that I could not discount. And these people always produce something that was quite startling. And it's a very small percentage of all the cases that I've investigated.
It's always hard to figure out when you're talking about channelers who claim to be getting information from extraterrestrials or ultra-terrestrials, how much stock to put in them, because as you know, after being in the field for so long, these alien editorials that come out, you guys better, aliens telling people, abductees, you better clean up your act and take care of your planet, or threatening that doom to the planet is coming any day now. It's hard to put a lot of stock in them because many of these predictions of doom and gloom do not come true.
Of course not. And that's the old trickster aspect. Many of these people who are channelers are just led around in circles, and I usually say that if you put them all in the same room together, they would probably have an argument on who was right and who was in contact with the right entities, and they would probably end up, pulling each other's hair out or punching each other in the nose. But in one particular case, I'll make it just quick. This fella, he was obviously channeling. He was channeling, and I was a guest. I was invited, and he kept on talking about the Space Brothers, the Space Brothers, the Space Brothers. And he said it so many times, our Space Brothers out there. And I raised my hand and had a question for him, and I said, aren't there any Space Sisters out there? And everybody looks at me like I'm crazy, and I say, well, I would hate to think that, the universe is male-dominated out there. Actually, in a case like this, everybody wanted to believe too much. I was asked to leave the room. I was escorted out of the channeler's room. I mean, I've done things like this before, but there are people who have produced things channeling that have left me away, walking away, scratching my head, and I still have a lot of that data today.
One person for whom you have few doubts is Rosemary Guiley, right?
Well, Rosemary, is a paranormal investigator. She's experienced a lot of stuff herself, and of course, she's very down to earth. She's very serious about what she does. She's probably the most dedicated paranormal researcher that I have ever met. She's constantly traveling all over the place, investigating, and she really only writes about a small percentage of all the things that she does research. And we've been working together now for a few years now. We actually have 2 books coming out together. But she inspired me, as you can say, to stop, researching in the sidelines and just collecting all this information and just get it out there.
One of those books, your publisher sent it to me, The Vengeful Jinn, written by the 2 of you, and I'd love to get into that. We're not going to have enough time to do it tonight, but we'll have to have you come back at some point, unveiling the hidden agendas of genies, because that sort of fits into the larger scenario you're describing of ultra-terrestrials as sort of a catch-all phrase, right?
Oh, yeah, that's, you see, if you read all of my books starting from Night Siege, you see my ideas slowly evolve into something. I realize that, extraterrestrial spacecrafts cannot explain this entire thing. Finally, when we get to the book, The Vengeful Jinn, the Jinn, I'm starting to put all of this together with Rosemary's help, with her knowledge of history of the paranormal and my knowledge of science and my exploration of the Jinn in the Middle East and tracking down the legends of the Jinn in the Middle East. We kind of merged it all together into one book that we hope is going to be a groundbreaking book into the paranormal that will make many paranormal investigators consider that there's something else out there that's been hidden for a very long time that could be responsible for a large percentage of all the stuff we call supernatural, UFOs, or paranormal.
Well, that's sort of the same theme of the ultra-terrestrial book.
Exactly. It is. But, the jinn, I focus primarily on the jinn. Who are they? What are they? From what I can find. And the word jinn means hidden. So it's very hard to find information. For example, if you go over to the Middle East, you'll find quite a few legends of the jinn, but it's all lost in folklore, in magic, in religion, and so on and so on. Once you take all that, masking stuff out of there and all the crazy stuff and all the religious stuff, there's a core there that indicates that you're dealing with an intelligence that was probably in